I stood frozen in the marble lobby of Lancaster and Associates as Mr. Lancaster's words echoed in my mind. Your mother attempted to transfer your entire $8 million trust fund to your stepbrother this morning. My hands trembled, holding the emergency summons he'd sent. But Anne-Marie, he continued with a strange smile, your grandmother predicted this would happen. She left very specific instructions. The elevator doors opened behind me. Shall we discuss how your grandmother outsmarted them all from beyond the grave? The leather chairs in Mr. Lancaster's office felt cold against my skin as I sat across from the mahogany desk that had witnessed 3 generations of family legal matters. My stomach churned while he pulled out a thick manila folder, its edges worn from what looked like frequent handling. The morning light streaming through the 20th floor windows cast long shadows across documents that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Your mother arrived at First National Bank at exactly 9:07 this morning. Mr. Lancaster began adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he pulled out a tablet. The screen flickered to life, showing black and white security footage that made my blood run cold. There was Patricia, my stepmother of 12 years, walking confidently through the bank's entrance in her favorite Chanel suit, the one she'd bought last month, during what she called her little shopping therapy. Behind her, Marcus strutted with the kind of arrogance that only 25 years of being spoiled could create. Watch this part carefully, Mr. Lancaster murmured, fast-forwarding to timestamps showing 9:23. The footage showed Patricia at a private banker's desk sliding documents across the polished surface with practiced ease. Marcus sat beside her, his designer sneakers bouncing with barely contained excitement. Even without audio, I could see his mouth forming words, probably already spending money that wasn't his. How did they even get access to attempt this? My voice came out smaller than intended, betraying the shock coursing through my system. The trust fund from Grandmother Eleanor was supposed to be ironclad, protected by layers of legal safeguards she'd insisted on before her death 3 years ago. Mr. Lancaster's expression darkened as he pulled out another set of papers. Your mother has been planning this for months, Anne-Marie. These documents claim you're mentally incompetent, unable to manage your own financial affairs. She had them notarized. Witnessed even included what appeared to be medical evaluations. The room spun slightly as I examined the papers. There was my name twisted into a narrative of instability and incompetence. Fabricated therapy sessions I'd never attended, medications I'd never taken, incidents that never happened. The thoroughness of the deception took my breath away. This wasn't a spontaneous grab for money. This was calculated destruction of my character. William, there's more. Mr. Lancaster continued, his fingers sliding across the tablet to reveal email screenshots. My investigator found these communications between your mother and Marcus, dating back to your grandmother's funeral. The messages loaded slowly, each one a deeper cut than the last. They'd been planning this since the day we'd buried Eleanor while I was still raw with grief, while Patricia had held my hand at the graveside and whispered words of comfort. The emails detailed their strategy with chilling precision. Marcus would receive the full $8 million, then funnel portions back to Patricia through a series of shell companies they'd already established. They discussed my work at the nonprofit, how my modest lifestyle and small apartment would make it easier to claim I couldn't handle wealth. They mocked my dedication to helping others, called it evidence of poor judgment. Read this one, Mr. Lancaster said quietly, pointing to an email dated just last week. My eyes burned as I absorbed Patricia's words to Marcus. The transfer will go through smoothly. Trust me, Anne-Marie doesn't need money. Pretty girls marry rich husbands to take care of them. Ugly ones like her should be grateful for scraps. She's lucky we let her keep that pathetic job at the shelter. The cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. 12 years of family dinners, of trying to bridge the gap between us, of believing that somewhere beneath her cold exterior, Patricia might actually care about me. All of it crumbled into dust. I wasn't even human to her, just an obstacle between her and $8 million. How did you stop them? I managed to ask, my voice steadier now as anger began to replace shock. The initial paralysis was wearing off, replaced by a burning need to understand how deep this betrayal went. Mr. Lancaster's stern expression cracked slightly, revealing what almost looked like satisfaction. The bank manager at First National happens to be my nephew, James Lancaster. When Patricia walked in with transfer documents for an $8 million trust fund, he knew something was wrong. Your grandmother had specifically instructed him years ago to alert me immediately if anyone tried to access your trust without you present. The revelation stunned me. Grandmother Eleanor had thought of everything, planned for contingencies I couldn't have imagined. Even from beyond the grave, she was still protecting me from the wolves she'd seen circling. The security footage continued playing, showing James Lancaster excusing himself from the meeting, his face a mask of professional calm, while Patricia and Marcus waited oblivious to their plan unraveling. He stalled them for 45 minutes while contacting me, Mr. Lancaster explained, told them the system was experiencing technical difficulties, needed additional verification for such a large transfer. Patricia grew impatient, started making threats about taking their business elsewhere. Marcus actually had the audacity to mention his plans for the money, talking about a yacht he had his eye on, a place in Miami Beach. I watched the footage of their growing frustration with grim fascination. Patricia's perfectly composed facade cracked as minutes ticked by. She gestured wildly, her manicured nails catching the light as she pointed at documents at James at the computer screen. Marcus slouched deeper in his chair, the excitement draining from his face as reality set in that his instant windfall wasn't materializing as planned. They left after James told them the transfer would need additional processing time due to the amount, Mr. Lancaster said, closing the tablet. But here's what concerns me most, Anna Marie. The forged documents about your mental competency are sophisticated. This wasn't done by amateurs. They had help, possibly from someone with medical or legal credentials. Your mother has been building a case against you that goes beyond simple fraud. The weight of his words settled over me like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just about money anymore. Patricia had been systematically working to destroy my credibility, my reputation, possibly even my freedom. If she could convince the right people I was mentally incompetent, she could take control of not just my trust fund, but my entire life. What do we do now? I asked, though part of me already knew this was just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn and Patricia had fired the first shot. What she didn't know was that Grandmother Eleanor had been preparing me for this war my entire life. Mr. Lancaster reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was written across it in Grandmother Eleanor's distinctive handwriting, still elegant, despite the tremor that had affected her hands in her final years. Your grandmother left instructions that this envelope should only be given to you when, and I quote, Patricia finally shows her true colors. I believe that moment has arrived. My fingers shook slightly as I took the envelope. The paper felt heavy, weighted with secrets and promises from beyond the grave. Whatever was inside would change. Everything would set into motion events that had been waiting in the shadows for 3 years. The war for my inheritance had begun, but I was beginning to understand that Grandmother Eleanor had been playing a longer game than any of us had imagined. The envelope's wax seal broke with a soft crack that seemed to echo through Mr. Lancaster's office like a gunshot. Inside, Grandmother Eleanor's handwriting flowed across several pages of her personal stationery, the lavender paper she'd always favored, still carrying a faint hint of her signature perfume. My throat tightened as I recognized the date at the top of the first page, written just 2 weeks before she passed. My mind drifted back 3 years to that private hospital room where she'd spent her final days. The cancer had taken so much from her body, but never her mind. That afternoon, when she'd sent everyone away except me, remained vivid in my memory. Patricia had protested, claiming family should stay together during such difficult times, but Eleanor's glare could still command obedience even from her deathbed. Anne Marie, my brave girl, she had whispered once we were alone, her frail hand gripping mine with surprising strength. There are truths about your stepmother that your father never wanted to see. He loved her, or perhaps he loved the illusion she created. But I've watched her for 12 years and I know exactly what she is. I had tried to protest then, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. Despite my complicated relationship with Patricia, I'd still believed family meant something. Eleanor had simply smiled, the kind of knowing smile that came from 8 decades of reading people like open books. Patricia Winters isn't her real name. Eleanor had continued, her voice growing stronger with urgency. She was Patricia Kowalski when she worked at the hospice where she met your father. Did you know she wasn't actually a registered nurse? She was an aide, someone who emptied bedpans and changed sheets, but she wore scrubs and let grieving families assume she had medical training. The revelation had shocked me then, but I'd pushed it aside, attributing it to the medication or the approach of death, making Eleanor paranoid. Now, reading her letter, I realized every word had been calculated truth. The pages detailed Patricia's systematic approach to infiltrating our family, starting with how she targeted my father during his most vulnerable time after my mother's death. Your father was drowning in grief, the letter explained. Patricia appeared like a life preserver, offering comfort and stability. She studied our family's dynamics, learned our weaknesses. She knew about the trust fund I'd established, for you knew its value would only grow. $20 million by your 30th birthday if properly managed. She married your father not for love, but for proximity to that fortune. The letter went on to describe how Patricia had slowly poisoned my father's relationships with his family. She'd convinced him that I reminded him too much of my late mother, that seeing me was holding back his healing. She'd suggested boarding school and college across the country, always framing distance as healthy for everyone involved. Meanwhile, she'd worked to isolate him from Eleanor, planting seeds of doubt about his mother's mental acuity. But I've been watching her too, Eleanor had written. For 12 years, I've had private investigators documenting her every move. The sealed box at the bottom of this envelope contains everything they found. Use it wisely, my dear. The woman who calls herself your stepmother is far more dangerous than you know. My hands trembled as I reached for the small key taped to the bottom of the final page. Mr. Lancaster produced a safety deposit box from his office safe, its metal surface cold against my palms. The key turned smoothly, revealing contents that made my blood run cold. Photographs, documents, recordings on USB drives, all meticulously labeled and dated. The first folder contained images of Patricia meeting with a man I didn't recognize, their body language, intimate, in ways that spoke of long familiarity. The timestamps showed these meetings occurred while my father was traveling for business, sometimes while he was in the hospital for his heart condition. The man's face became clearer in later photos, and my stomach dropped as I recognized features that looked disturbingly familiar. Is that... I couldn't finish the question, but Mr. Lancaster nodded grimly. Marcus's biological father, not Patricia's trainer's son as she claimed, her own child, hidden and reintroduced under false pretenses. He pulled out a birth certificate from the stack. Marcus Kowalski, born when Patricia was 19. She gave him to her sister to raise, then brought him back into her life once she'd secured her position in your family. The investigators' reports painted a picture of calculated deception spanning years. Patricia had been married before to an elderly widower named Harold Morrison. He died under suspicious circumstances just 18 months after their wedding, leaving her a modest inheritance that she'd used to reinvent herself. The medical examiner had noted irregularities in his toxicology report, but hadn't pursued them. Patricia had cremated him quickly, claiming religious reasons. There's more. Eleanor's letter continued. I hired a forensic accountant to review your father's business dealings in his final year. Patricia had power of attorney by then, claimed he'd signed it willingly, but look at the signature comparisons in folder 3. She'd been practicing his handwriting for months. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged checks, redirected payments, business partnerships dissolved without my father's knowledge. Patricia had been pillaging his wealth while keeping him sedated and compliant. The medical records showed prescriptions for anxiety medications and sleep aids in doses that would have kept him perpetually foggy, unable to question the world shifting around him. Your father tried to reconcile with me near the end. Eleanor had written her handwriting shaking slightly on this page. He called me one night more lucid than he'd been in months. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd discovered something about Patricia. We were supposed to meet the next day. He died that night. The official cause was heart failure, but I've always wondered if he'd taken too much of his medication or if someone had helped him along. Tears burned my eyes, but I forced myself to continue reading. Eleanor had documented everything with the thoroughness of someone who knew they were running out of time. She'd even recorded conversations with household staff who'd witnessed Patricia's treatment of my father, her careful isolation tactics, her manipulation of his medications. The USB drive labeled Insurance contains my video deposition, the letter explained. I recorded it with Mr. Lancaster present, detailing everything I witnessed and discovered. I knew Patricia would move against you once I was gone. She's been patient, playing the grieving widow, the supportive stepmother. But patience has its limits, especially when $8 million sits just out of reach. I inserted the USB drive into Mr. Lancaster's computer, and Eleanor's face filled the screen. Despite her illness, she dressed formally for the recording, her dignity intact, even as her body betrayed her. Her voice was clear and precise as she laid out Patricia's crimes, providing dates, times, and evidence for each accusation. My granddaughter Anne-Marie is of completely sound mind, Eleanor stated firmly in the recording. Any suggestion otherwise is fabrication. I've watched Patricia build a false narrative for years, collecting staged incidents and twisted interpretations. She once tried to convince me that Anna-Marie's dedication to nonprofit work was evidence of poor judgment. In reality, it shows the kind of character Patricia could never understand, someone who values helping others over accumulating wealth. The video continued for nearly an hour, Eleanor methodically destroying any claim Patricia might make against my competency. She'd had my academic records, employment evaluations, and psychological assessments from reputable professionals all properly documented. It was a complete defensive wall against the attack she'd known was coming. The final folder contained something that stopped my heart. Photos of Patricia with another elderly man taken just 6 months ago. She was wearing a nurse's uniform again, walking with him through a garden that looked like another hospice facility. The investigators' notes indicated she'd been volunteering there, building relationships with wealthy patients who had limited family connections. She's not done with our family, Eleanor's letter concluded. She's already hunting for her next victim. Stop her, Anne-Marie. Not just for yourself, but for all the others she'll destroy if left unchecked. The trust fund was never just about money. It was bait to keep her close enough to watch to gather evidence. Now you have everything you need. Make her pay for what she did to your father and protect whoever she targets next. I sat back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Eleanor's planning. For 3 years, she'd been orchestrating this moment from beyond the grave, ensuring I'd have every weapon needed for the battle ahead. Patricia thought she was making a clever grab for money. She had no idea she'd walked into a trap years in the making. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Mr. Lancaster said quietly, organizing the evidence back into careful piles. She knew Patricia would eventually show her hand. The trust fund terms were designed to force her to act overtly to commit crimes that could be prosecuted. Eleanor wanted justice not just for your family, but for Harold Morrison and anyone else Patricia has hurt. I picked up the final item from the box, a small leather journal. Inside, Eleanor had written personal messages for me to read at different stages of whatever came next. The first entry was dated for today, when Patricia reveals herself. Her words were gentle but firm, reminding me that strength isn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. She knew I'd be scared, I whispered, tracing her handwriting with my finger. She also knew you'd be brave, Mr. Lancaster replied. Now, shall we discuss our next moves? Patricia has no idea what she's truly unleashed. Your grandmother made sure of that. As I nodded, gathering the evidence back into its box, I felt Eleanor's presence in the room like a warm embrace. The woman who'd raised me after my mother's death, who'd seen through Patricia's facades when everyone else was fooled, had given me one final gift, not just money or evidence, but the power to bring justice to those who prey on the vulnerable. Patricia Winters was about to learn that some grandmothers protect their families even from beyond the grave, and their granddaughters can be far more dangerous than they appear. The house felt different as I pulled into the circular driveway that evening, even though nothing had physically changed since morning. The colonial facade still gleamed white in the setting sun. The roses Patricia obsessed over still bloomed in perfect rows. But knowledge has a way of shifting perception. And now I saw the house for what it was, a beautifully decorated trap where my father had spent his final years. Through the dining room windows, I could see movement shadows against the warm light that had once meant home. The sound of champagne corks popping carried across the lawn, followed by Patricia's distinctive laugh, high and tinkling like breaking glass. They were celebrating, already counting money that would never be theirs. I sat in my car for a moment longer, Eleanor's journal pressed against my chest, gathering strength for what lay ahead. The front door opened before I could reach for my keys. Patricia stood silhouetted in the doorway, her silhouette backlit like some terrible angel. She wore the cream-colored dress she'd bought for what she called special occasions, paired with the pearl necklace my father had given her on their 10th anniversary. Every detail was calculated to project success and refinement, but now I could see the predator beneath the polish. Anne-Marie, darling. Her voice dripped with false warmth as she stepped aside to let me enter. Perfect timing. Marcus and I were just having a little toast. Come join us. After all, family should celebrate together. The foyer smelled of her signature perfume mixed with something else, the sharp scent of anticipation, perhaps, or the metallic tang of greed. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I followed her to the living room, each step measured and deliberate. I'd learned from Eleanor that sometimes the best strategy was to let your opponents think they'd already won. Marcus lounged on the leather sectional, his feet up on the coffee table my mother had chosen 25 years ago. A champagne flute dangled from his fingers, already half empty, while another bottle chilled in the silver bucket beside him. His grin widened when he saw me, the kind of smile a hyena might give wounded prey. "There's our little humanitarian," he drawled, raising his glass in mock salute. "How was work today? Save any lost causes, feed any strays." His laughter was ugly, made worse by Patricia's joining in their cruelty, harmonizing like some hellish duet. "Oh, work was enlightening," I replied evenly, settling into the wingback chair across from them. I learned quite a bit about how people take advantage of others' trust. Fascinating stuff, really. The lengths some people will go to for money. Patricia's laugh faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, pouring herself another glass with steady hands. "Well, that's why it's so important to be practical about these things. Speaking of which, we should discuss your future, Anne-Marie. Things are going to be changing around here." From the staircase, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Chloe, my 16-year-old stepsister, sat halfway up the stairs, partially hidden by the banister. Her face was pale in the dim light eyes, wide as she watched the scene unfolding below. I'd always felt protective of her, this quiet girl who'd been thrust into our fractured family dynamic. Now I wondered what else she'd witnessed over the years. Changes can be good, I said carefully, watching Patricia's face for any sign she knew about the blocked transfer. Sometimes they reveal people's true natures. Show us who we can really trust. Marcus snorted champagne, nearly spilling from his glass. Trust? That's rich coming from you. You trust everyone, Annie. It's pathetic, really. All those sob stories at your little shelter, and you swallow everyone. No wonder you can't see what's right in front of you. And what exactly is in front of me? I asked, genuinely curious how far they'd go with their charade. Patricia set down her glass with deliberate precision, her manicured fingers smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. When she looked at me, the mask had dropped completely. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating that reminded me of a snake assessing its prey. What's in front of you is reality, she said, each word carefully measured. You're 27 years old, working at a nonprofit that barely pays minimum wage, living in a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. You have no ambition, no drive, no understanding of how the world really works. Did you honestly think Eleanor's money would just sit there forever, waiting for you to figure out your life? The words stung, not because they were true, but because they revealed how Patricia saw the world. Everything was transactional to her, every relationship measured in dollars and opportunities. My work helping domestic violence survivors meant nothing because it didn't generate wealth. My small apartment was a failure because it wasn't a mansion. In her mind, I was worthless because I chose service over acquisition. I've always wondered, I said slowly, what made you choose our family? There must have been other options at the hospice, other grieving widowers with money. What made my father special? The question clearly caught her off guard. Marcus looked between us, confusion replacing his smugness. Patricia's jaw tightened a tell I'd never noticed before, but now seemed glaringly obvious. She didn't like being questioned, didn't like the shift in power dynamics. Your father was a good man who needed support, she replied stiffly. I provided that support. I've been nothing but devoted to this family for 12 years. Devoted. I repeated, tasting the word like something rotten. Is that what you call it? Tell me, Patricia, was it devotion when you convinced him to send me away to boarding school? Was it devotion when you isolated him from Grandmother Eleanor? Or was that just good business? Marcus sat up straighter, his casual posture evaporating. Watch how you talk to my mother, he warned, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. The celebration atmosphere had shifted into something else, something dangerous and unpredictable. Your mother... I turned to him, allowing a small smile to play at my lips. How long have you known Patricia was your biological mother, Marcus? Was it before or after she introduced you as her trainer's son? I'm genuinely curious about the timeline of lies. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Patricia went rigid, her face draining of color so quickly I thought she might faint. From the stairs, I heard Chloe's sharp intake of breath, but I kept my focus on the two conspirators before me. I don't know what you're talking about, Patricia managed, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. You're clearly having some kind of episode. This is exactly why we've been concerned about your mental state. Concerned enough to forge medical documents. I pulled out my phone, showing them photos I'd taken of the evidence at Mr. Lancaster's office. Concerned enough to create an entire false narrative about my stability, or just concerned that $8 million was sitting out of reach? Marcus found his voice again, anger replacing shock. You don't know anything. You've always been a naive little fool hiding behind your grandmother's skirts. At least now you know where you stand. Nobody wants you here, Annie. Nobody ever did. Mom only tolerated you for the money, and once that's transferred, you'll be nothing to this family. The transfer, I said softly. Yes, let's talk about that. How did the bank visit go this morning? Everything processed smoothly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's hands clenched into fists, her perfect manicure digging into her palms. She knew then that I knew that her carefully orchestrated plan had failed before it had truly begun. But instead of backing down, she doubled down on her cruelty. "You think you've won something?" She stood towering over me in her heels. "You pathetic little mouse. Yes, I tried to take the money. Why shouldn't I? I've spent 12 years in this mausoleum playing nursemaid to your father, pretending to care about his boring stories and failing health. I earned every penny of that trust fund. Earned it by killing him." The words escaped before I could stop them, fueled by Eleanor's revelations and my own growing rage. Patricia's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Killing him, your father's heart was a ticking time bomb long before I arrived. All those rich dinners, those business meetings with cigars and brandy, I just made his final months more comfortable, more manageable. If he'd lived longer, he would have squandered everything on medical bills and false hope. I did him a favor." "You increased his medication doses." I pressed, standing to face her. "You isolated him from everyone who loved him. You forged his signature on business documents. You stole from him while he was dying." I took what I deserved. Patricia's composure finally cracked completely. "Do you know what it's like to empty bedpans for millionaires, to watch them waste fortunes on ungrateful children while people like me scrape by on minimum wage? Your father was just another selfish rich man who thought a trophy wife could ease his conscience. Well, I gave him what he wanted, and I took what I needed." "And what about what Chloe needed?" I gestured toward the stairs where her sister remained frozen. "What about having a mother who wasn't a criminal, a family that wasn't built on lies?" Patricia's gaze flicked to Chloe dismissively. "She'll understand when she's older. Money makes everything easier. Without it, you're nothing. Look at you, Anne-Marie, working yourself to death for strangers who will forget you the moment they leave your shelter, living in squalor because you're too proud to see reality. You think kindness matters. Compassion. The only thing that matters is power, and money is power. Is that why you're already scouting for your next victim?" I pulled out the photos of her with the elderly man at the hospice, already wearing scrubs again, already playing the devoted caregiver. Marcus grabbed the photos, his face twisting with rage. "You had her followed. You spied on us." "Grandmother had her followed," I corrected. "For years. Every meeting, every scheme, every lie documented and verified. She knew exactly what Patricia was, and she made sure I'd have proof when the time came." Patricia sank back onto the couch, the fight draining from her as she processed the implications. Her perfect plan, years in the making, was unraveling like a cheap sweater. But even cornered, she remained dangerous, her mind already working on new angles. "You can't prove anything," she said finally. "Harold Morrison was cremated. Your father's death certificate lists natural causes. Those photos mean nothing. I volunteer at hospices because I care about the elderly." "The FBI might disagree," I said quietly, "especially when they connect you to 3 other suspicious deaths across state lines. Did you really think you could keep running the same con forever?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time, perhaps finally understanding that he'd been both accomplice and victim in her schemes. Chloe had crept down a few more stairs, her phone visible in her hands, its recording light steady and red. "You recorded all of this?" Patricia's voice was barely a whisper when she noticed her daughter's phone. Chloe nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I've been recording things for months. I knew something was wrong. I heard you talking to Marcus about the trust fund, about putting Anne-Marie away somewhere. I couldn't let you do it." The betrayal from her own daughter seemed to break something in Patricia. She looked around the room as if seeing it clearly for the first time, this beautiful prison she'd created for herself with her greed and cruelty. The champagne bottle sat forgotten in its bucket, the celebration transformed into a wake for her carefully constructed life. "You'll need more than recordings," she said finally, but the threat lacked conviction. I know too much about too many people. I have insurance of my own. I'm sure you do, I replied, gathering my things to leave. But here's something grandmother taught me that you never understood. True power doesn't come from money or blackmail or fear. It comes from truth, and the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. As I walked toward the door, I paused beside Chloe, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Pack a bag," I whispered. "You don't have to stay here tonight." The last thing I heard as I left was Patricia screaming at Marcus about loyalty and family, about everything she'd sacrificed for their plan. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at the shattered champagne glass on the floor, perhaps finally understanding that some things once broken could never be put back together again. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as I crept through the darkened house, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian runner my mother had chosen decades ago. After leaving earlier, I'd returned with Chloe's help, using her key to slip inside while Patricia and Marcus argued in the master bedroom. Their voices carried through the walls, accusations and recriminations echoing through rooms that had once held laughter. My father's study remained exactly as he'd left it 3 years ago, a shrine to a life cut short. Patricia had preserved it perfectly, perhaps thinking it made her seem like a devoted widow. The leather-bound books still carried his fingerprints, the desk blotter still showed the impressions of his final notes. Moonlight streamed through the bay windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. I moved to the bookshelf, running my fingers along familiar spines until I found what I was looking for. The Shakespeare First Folio, a wedding gift from my mother's parents, sat precisely where it always had. But as I pulled it from the shelf, my hands trembled with anticipation. Eleanor's letter had been specific about this hiding place, one my father had shown her during their brief reconciliation. The book was heavier than it should have been. Inside, where Hamlet's soliloquy should have been, my father had carved out a hollow space, documents nestled within, wrapped in plastic to protect them from time and moisture. My throat tightened as I recognized his handwriting on the outer envelope. For Anne-Marie, when the truth matters more than comfort. The first document made my hands shake. A DNA test dated 2 months before his death, confirming with 99.9% certainty that I was his biological daughter. Paper clipped to it was a note in his increasingly shaky script. "Patricia lied about everything. You are mine, have always been mine. I'm sorry I let her poison my mind against you." Beneath that lay his real will, properly witnessed and notarized by colleagues from his firm. The differences from the version Patricia had produced after his death were stark. This will left the house to me with provisions for Chloe's education, but nothing for Patricia beyond the minimum required by state law. He'd seen through her by the end, too late to save himself, but not too late to try protecting his daughters. A bundle of letters tied with string came next, correspondence between my father and Eleanor that Patricia had intercepted. In them, he detailed his growing suspicions about his wife, his fear that she was drugging him, his desperate attempts to change his will and protect his assets. The final letter, dated just 2 days before his death, was the most damning. "Mother, you were right about everything. Patricia is not who she claims to be. I've discovered she was never a registered nurse, that her credentials are forged. Worse, I believe she's been slowly poisoning me. The medications make me so foggy, but when I don't take them, I see clearly. I've hidden evidence in the study. If something happens to me, tell Anne-Marie to look where Hamlet contemplates existence. The truth is there." My vision blurred with tears as I continued through the cache. Financial records showed Patricia had been siphoning money for years, small amounts that added up to hundreds of thousands. She'd opened credit cards in my father's name, maxed them out, then hidden the statements. Business deals he'd never authorized, partnerships dissolved against his wishes, all bearing signatures that looked like his, but weren't quite right. A medical file made me sink into his desk chair. Records from a private investigator showed Patricia purchasing medications, online drugs that weren't prescribed to anyone in our household. Sedatives, heart medications, and doses that could be lethal if mismanaged, sleeping aids strong enough to keep someone unconscious for days. The investigator had photographed her picking up packages from a P.O. box registered under a false name. "Smart girl," a voice whispered from the doorway, making me jump. Chloe stood there in pajamas and slippers, her face pale but determined. "I knew you'd come back. She's passed out now, took a bunch of Xanax after you left. Marcus is in the pool house, probably planning his escape." "You should be in bed," I said gently, but she shook her head and moved closer, pointing to a section of the bookshelf I hadn't examined. "There's more," she said quietly. "I've watched Patricia in here sometimes late at night. She doesn't know I know about her hiding spots." Chloe reached behind a leather-bound atlas, pressing something that clicked softly. A section of the bookshelf swung open slightly, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside were documents that made everything else pale in comparison. Marriage certificates, 3 of them, all showing Patricia married to different elderly men over the past 20 years. Death certificates for all 3 husbands, each dying within 2 years of marriage. Insurance policies, wills, bank statements showing large transfers after each death. Harold Morrison was her second husband. I breathed, recognizing the name from Eleanor's investigation. But there were others. Chloe pulled out a notebook, Patricia's handwriting filling pages with cold calculations, names of potential targets, their estimated net worth, their health conditions, their family situations. My father's name appeared halfway through with notes about his recent widowhood, his substantial assets, his vulnerable emotional state. It was a predator's journal documenting past kills and planning future ones. "Oh, she called it her retirement planning," Chloe said bitterly. "I heard her telling Marcus once that every old man was just a walking lottery ticket. You just had to know which ones to pick and how long to wait before cashing in." Photographs tumbled out next Patricia with different hair colors and styles using different names. Dolores Patterson, Patricia Coleman, Patty Hendricks. In each photo, she stood beside an elderly man playing the devoted caregiver, the loving wife, the concerned companion. The men all had the same look in their eyes, that glazed, medicated stare I remembered seeing in my father during his final months. "There's one more thing," Chloe said, reaching deep into the hidden compartment. She pulled out a small recorder, the kind used for dictation. "I found this last year but was too scared to listen to it alone." I pressed play and my father's voice filled the room, weak but clear. "October 15th. Patricia doesn't know I have this. The medications are making it hard to think, but I need to record this while I can. She's killing me. Slowly, carefully, but killing me nonetheless. Just like she killed Harold Morrison. I found his obituary, called his son. Same symptoms, same medications, same suspicious timing. I've hidden evidence everywhere I can think of. If you're listening to this, it means she succeeded. Don't let her get away with it. Protect Anne-Marie. Protect Chloe. Stop her before she does this again." The recording continued with dates, times, specific incidents. My father documenting Patricia, adding extra pills to his drinks, catching her with syringes full of something she claimed was vitamins. His voice grew weaker as the recordings progressed, but his determination never wavered. He'd spent his final weeks building a case against his own wife, knowing he probably wouldn't live to see justice served. "We have to take all of this to the police," I said, but Chloe was already shaking her head. "She's got friends everywhere," my stepsister warned. "Doctors who owe her favors, cops. She's charmed lawyers she's sleeping with. We need more than local police. We need someone she can't reach." I thought of Mr. Lancaster's contacts, the federal investigators Eleanor had mentioned in her letter. This went beyond family betrayal or simple fraud. This was serial murder, organized and methodical, spanning decades and state lines. Patricia wasn't just a gold digger or a manipulative stepmother. She was something far more dangerous. "Help me pack all of this," I told Chloe, spreading Patricia's jacket on the floor to bundle the evidence. "We need to get out of here before she wakes up." As we worked, Chloe pulled out one final item from behind the atlas, a safety deposit box key with a tag reading First National Bank Box 472, the same bank where Patricia had tried to steal my trust fund just that morning. "I've seen her with this key," Chloe explained. "She doesn't know I made a copy last year. Whatever's in that box, she checks on it every month." I pocketed the key, my mind racing with possibilities. What else had Patricia hidden? What other evidence of her crimes waited in that metal box dawn was starting to break outside, painting the study in soft pink light? Somewhere above us, Patricia slept off her medication, unaware that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. "Are you scared?" Chloe asked, as we prepared to leave, her young face etched with worry beyond her years. Terrified, I admitted, hefting the bundle of evidence. But Grandmother Eleanor used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. And this needs to be done. We slipped out as quietly as we'd entered, two sisters, bound not by blood, but by shared trauma and determination. Behind us, the house stood silent and imposing, keeping its secrets for just a little longer. But secrets, like bodies, have a way of surfacing. Patricia had taught me that. Now it was time to return the lesson. The kitchen smelled of coffee and menace when Marcus cornered me there the next morning. I'd returned to collect more of my belongings, thinking the house would be empty, but he'd been waiting. His usually styled hair hung limp around his face, yesterday's designer clothes wrinkled and stained with what looked like whiskey. The golden boy facade had cracked, revealing something desperate and dangerous underneath. "We need to talk," he said, blocking my path to the door. His bloodshot eyes darted, nervously checking windows as if expecting FBI agents to materialize from the azalea bushes. "Mom's lost it completely. She's upstairs talking to herself, making plans that don't make sense. But you and we can work something out." I kept my expression neutral, gripping my phone in my pocket where I'd already started recording. "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind, Marcus?" He pulled out a manila folder, slapping it on the marble countertop between us. Legal documents, spilled out forms I didn't recognize, but that made my stomach clench with instinctive dread. "Sign these. They state you're voluntarily transferring your trust fund to me for management. You'll get an allowance enough to keep your little apartment and continue your charity work. Everyone wins." Everyone wins. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. "How exactly do I win by giving you $8 million? His face darkened, the mask slipping further. "You win by keeping your life intact. See, Annie, I've been busy too. While you were playing detective last night, I was building insurance." He pulled out his phone, showing me a website displayed on the screen. My photo stared back at me, surrounded by text that made my blood run cold. AnneMarieMentalHealth.com, he said proudly. "Amazing what you can create in a few hours with the right motivation. Look, there's your psychiatric history complete with diagnoses you never knew you had. Severe anxiety disorder, delusional episodes, persecution complex. I've got fake therapist notes dating back years, all properly backdated and formatted." The website was sophisticated, professionally designed to look like a legitimate mental health advocacy platform. But the content was pure poison, fabricated incidents of me having breakdowns at work, threatening colleagues who didn't exist, experiencing hallucinations. He'd even created fake news articles about disturbances at the shelter where I worked, complete with quotes from concerned staff members about my increasingly erratic behavior. "That's slander," I said, but my voice came out weaker than intended. "No one will believe this garbage." "Well, won't they?" Marcus clicked through more pages. "I've already sent links to your boss, your coworkers, major donors to your shelter. Sure, they might not believe it all at first, but doubt is like cancer, Annie. Once it takes root, it spreads. How long before they start questioning whether you should be working with vulnerable populations? How long before someone suggests you take a leave of absence for everyone's safety? He wasn't wrong. In the nonprofit world, reputation was everything. Even unfounded allegations could destroy years of trust building. The families I worked with had already been betrayed by so many people. Would they trust someone who appeared to have hidden mental health issues? Would my colleagues defend me or distance themselves? I've also been reaching out to your network. He continued, scrolling through sent emails. Concerned family member worried about your welfare, asking if they've noticed any troubling behavior. Planting seeds, you might say. Some have already responded with their own concerns. Amazing how eager people are to pathologize kindness as instability. My hands trembled as I watched him demonstrate the depth of his campaign. He'd created social media accounts in my name, posting increasingly bizarre content. Photos of me edited to look disheveled, posts about conspiracy theories. I'd never believe, rants against imaginary enemies. The timestamps had been manipulated to make it appear this decline had been happening for months. Your girlfriend Tiffany, I said, suddenly remembering her from the outline. Does she know what you're doing? His grin widened. Tiffany's been helping. Turns out her cousin works at a mental health facility outside the city. Very exclusive, very discreet. They specialize in long-term care for adults with treatment-resistant conditions. The paperwork's all ready, just waiting for signatures. As if on cue, the kitchen door opened and Tiffany strutted in. Where Marcus looked disheveled, she appeared immaculate. Every blonde hair in place, designer purse swinging from her manicured grip. Her smile was sharp as broken glass blue eyes, calculating my worth like I was merchandise. Oh, good you're here, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I've already put deposits down on the venues, the Ritz-Carlton for the ceremony, that gorgeous estate in the Hamptons for the reception. Do you have any idea how much a society wedding costs these days? We're looking at $500,000 minimum. Planning on using my trust fund for your wedding? I asked, amazed at their audacity. Our wedding is just the beginning, Tiffany corrected, settling onto a bar stool like a queen taking her throne. Marcus and I have plans. Real estate development, maybe a boutique hotel chain. Your little trust fund is seed money for an empire, better than wasting it on homeless people and battered women, don't you think? She pulled out her own phone, showing me spreadsheets and business plans. They'd mapped out my entire trust fund, allocating every dollar to their schemes. Vacation homes in Aspen and Miami, a yacht they'd already named New Beginnings, investments in cryptocurrency and tech startups. My inheritance reduced to line items in their fantasy lifestyle. The paperwork Patricia filed yesterday might have failed, Marcus said, returning to the immediate threat. But this plan won't. See, involuntary commitment requires family consent and medical recommendation. Patricia's still your legal guardian, according to some documents dear old dad signed. And Dr. Brennan Tiffany's cousin's friend is very sympathetic to families dealing with troubled relatives. You mean he's willing to commit fraud for a price? I translated. Such an ugly word, Tiffany tisked. He prefers to think of it as providing necessary care for someone who clearly needs help. After all, what kind of person chooses to live in poverty when they have millions? What rational woman works herself to exhaustion for strangers instead of enjoying life? The behavior itself suggests mental instability. They'd thought of everything, or at least believed they had. The website, the emails, the facility, the complicit doctor. A complete trap designed to not just steal my money, but erase me entirely. Once committed, who knew how long they could keep me there? Long enough to drain the trust fund, certainly. Maybe forever, if it suited their purposes. Show her the best part, Tiffany urged, excitement coloring her voice. Marcus pulled up another document on his phone. Power of attorney. See, once you're committed for evaluation, Patricia becomes your legal guardian. She'll sign everything over to me for safekeeping. By the time you get out, if you get out, the money will be gone, properly invested in legitimate businesses. No crime, just family taking care of family. And if I refused to sign your papers, I asked though I could guess the answer. Then we skip straight to the involuntary commitment, Marcus said simply. Dr. Brennan can have an ambulance here within an hour. You'll be evaluated, found unstable, and transferred to the facility. Same result, just messier. Sign now and you keep your freedom and dignity. Force our hand and you lose everything. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as their trap revealed its full dimensions. But even as fear clawed at my throat, I remembered Eleanor's words about courage. They thought they'd covered every angle, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated how much evidence I'd already gathered, how many allies Eleanor had put in place. I need time to think, I said, playing for time. This is a lot to process. You have 1 hour, Marcus said, checking his Rolex. Mom wakes up from her pill coma around noon. She'll want answers, and trust me, you don't want to deal with her in withdrawal. She gets unpredictable. One more thing, Tiffany added as they prepared to leave. That little recording app you're running on your phone? We know about it. Modern problems require modern solutions. She pulled out a device that looked like a small radio. Signal jammer, your phone hasn't been transmitting anything since Marcus started talking, just in case you thought you were being clever. They left me alone in the kitchen, confident in their victory. But as I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of my childhood, something hardened inside me. They'd shown their hand too early, revealed their plans too completely. Now I knew exactly what I was fighting against, and more importantly, I knew their weaknesses. I walked to the window, gazing out at the garden where I'd played as a child. Somewhere out there, Eleanor's roses still bloomed stubborn and beautiful despite neglect. Like grandmother, like granddaughter. They could try to bury me, but they'd forgotten one crucial detail. Seeds planted in dark soil often grow the strongest roots. My hands shook as I folded clothes into a duffel bag, each movement mechanical, while my mind raced through escape routes. The hour Marcus had given me was nearly up, and I could hear movement downstairs that suggested Patricia was stirring from her medication-induced sleep. The trap was closing, and I needed to run before it snapped shut completely. You're not actually planning to leave, are you? I spun around to find Chloe standing in my doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. She should have been in class, but here she stood still in yesterday's clothes, dark circles under eyes that had seen too much for 16 years. You should be at school, I said, returning to my packing. This isn't your fight, Chloe. I'll figure something out, but you need to stay safe. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with quiet determination. Stop packing for a second and listen to me. You're not alone in this. You've never been alone even when it felt like it. Chloe, you don't understand, I began, but she cut me off with a gesture that reminded me painfully of Eleanor. I understand more than you think. She moved to my window, peering out at the driveway below. Marcus is pacing by his car, probably calling that witch Tiffany. Mom took another Xanax 20 minutes ago, so she'll be fuzzy for at least another hour. We have time, but not much. The casual way she tracked Patricia's medication schedule made me pause. How do you know all this? Instead of answering directly, Chloe pulled out her laptop, settling cross-legged on my bed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, pulling up folders within folders, each meticulously labeled with dates going back years. I started documenting everything when I was 12, she said quietly, the day Mom brought Marcus home and introduced him as her trainer's son. Even then, I knew something was wrong. He had her eyes, her mannerisms. You can't fake genetics. The screen filled with files, photos, videos, audio recordings, scanned documents. The volume was staggering. Chloe had turned our house into a surveillance state without anyone noticing, capturing evidence of Patricia's crimes with the patience of a professional investigator. Look at this, she said, opening a video file dated 3 months after my father's funeral. Patricia and Marcus sat in the study, unaware of the phone camera recording from behind a bookend. Their voices came through clear as crystal. 3 years, Patricia was saying. We wait 3 years after the old woman dies, then make our move. Anne-Marie won't see it coming. She's too soft, too trusting. What if she gets married? Marcus asked. What if she has kids? That complicates things. Patricia's laugh was cold. Look at her, working herself to death at that shelter, coming home exhausted and alone. She'll never marry. She's too damaged by her parents' deaths, too committed to saving everyone but herself. The perfect victim. I sank onto the bed beside Chloe, overwhelmed by the cruelty and calculation in their words. But my stepsister was just getting started. She pulled up audio files of Patricia on phone calls discussing my father's medications with someone she called doctor, though the voice sounded nothing like any physician who treated him. Increase the evening dose, Patricia instructed in one recording. He's getting too lucid asking questions. We need him compliant for the will signing next week. Another video showed Patricia in my father's room late at night adding drops from an unlabeled bottle to his water glass. The timestamp showed this was hours before he died, the very night he was supposed to meet Eleanor for reconciliation. I've been protecting this evidence for years. Chloe explained, her young face grave with responsibility that shouldn't have been hers to carry. I knew someday it would matter. I just didn't know when or how to use it. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked, though I suspected the answer. With what a 12-year-old's word against her mother, Chloe's smile was bitter. Besides, Mom had already started her campaign about my emotional problems. ADHD anxiety, oppositional defiance disorder. Any accusation I made would have been dismissed as acting out, so I waited and watched and recorded everything. She showed me more files, Patricia's hidden bank accounts, records of wire transfers to offshore holdings, correspondence with lawyers about trust fund loopholes. One folder made my breath catch. Screenshots of emails between Patricia and someone named Vladimir discussing ways to make deaths appear natural. She's part of a network, Chloe explained. There are others like her sharing techniques and targets. They call themselves caretakers, like it's some twisted joke. Vladimir specializes in Eastern European widowers. There's a woman in California who targets tech executives. They trade tips like recipes. The scope of it staggered me. This wasn't just Patricia's scheme. It was an entire underground economy of predators targeting the vulnerable elderly. My father had been caught in a web that stretched across continents, and Patricia was just one spider among many. There's something else, Chloe said, her voice dropping. Something about your birth mother. My heart stuttered. What about her? Chloe pulled up a folder labeled First Wife, containing documents I'd never seen. Medical records, insurance claims, police reports. My mother had died in a car accident when I was 2 or so, I'd always been told. But these documents painted a different picture. She was sick before the accident, Chloe said gently. Unexplained symptoms that started 6 months before she died. Fatigue, confusion, heart palpitations. Sound familiar. The blood drained from my face as I read symptoms identical to my father's final months. You think Patricia... I don't think she killed your mother, Chloe clarified quickly. The timeline doesn't work, but I think whoever did gave Patricia the playbook she later used on Dad. Look at this. She showed me employment records from the hospital where my mother had been treated. One name stood out, Vladimir Petrov, working as an orderly on my mother's floor. The same Vladimir from Patricia's emails 20 years later. They've been doing this for decades, I whispered, the full horror sinking in. My whole family. But now we can stop them, Chloe said firmly. I've been in contact with someone who can help. Someone who's been investigating this network for years. She pulled up an encrypted messaging app showing a conversation with someone identified only as Knight. His name is Robert Chen, Chloe explained. His father was one of Patricia's victims, her first husband that we know of. But Robert survived the poisoning attempt, faked his death, and has been building a case ever since. He's been waiting for someone with enough evidence to bring the whole network down. The hidden victim grandmother mentioned. I breathed. She was funding his investigation. Your grandmother was brilliant, Chloe confirmed. She found Robert years ago, helped him disappear, funded his work to expose these predators. He has resources, connections in federal law enforcement, everything we need to not just stop Mom and Marcus, but to destroy their entire network. A notification popped up on her screen. A message from Knight. Package delivered to Lancaster. Federal team standing by. Need confirmation to proceed. Package? I asked. Everything, Chloe said simply. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence I've collected. I uploaded it all to a secure server last night and sent access to Mr. Lancaster and Robert's federal contacts. They have enough to arrest Mom and Marcus today, but they need you to confirm you want to proceed. Once we do this, there's no going back. I thought of my father's voice on those recordings, weak but determined to expose the truth. I thought of my mother possibly murdered by the same network that had destroyed so many families. I thought of all the elderly victims still out there vulnerable to predators like Patricia. There's one more thing, Chloe said, pulling a small device from her backpack. This is a panic button. Robert gave it to me last year. Press it and federal agents will be here in minutes. He said to only use it when you're ready to bring everything crashing down. I took the device, its weight negligible, but its implications enormous. Downstairs I could hear Patricia's voice shrill and demanding, calling for Marcus. Time was running out. The hour he'd given me was almost up. Why, I asked Chloe suddenly, why help me? Patricia is your mother. Chloe's eyes hardened with wisdom beyond her years. She gave birth to me, but she was never my mother. Mothers protect their children. They don't use them as props in elaborate crimes. They don't teach them that love is weakness and kindness is stupidity. You've been more of a sister to me than she's ever been a mother. This is my chance to choose my real family. From downstairs came the sound of footsteps on marble, multiple sets moving with purpose. Marcus's voice carried up, telling someone named Dr. Brennan that I was upstairs, that I'd become increasingly agitated and delusional. They're here, Chloe whispered. The involuntary commitment team. You have to decide now. I looked at the panic button, then at my brave young stepsister who'd spent years preparing for this moment. The footsteps were climbing the stairs, now heavy and deliberate. In seconds, they'd be at my door, ready to drag me away to a nightmare of Patricia's making. Together, I asked Chloe. Together, she confirmed, placing her hand over mine. We pressed the button. The sunrise painted the courthouse steps in shades of gold and crimson as Mr. Lancaster and I rushed through the heavy doors, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The federal panic button had worked exactly as promised, with FBI agents arriving just as Dr. Brennan's team was preparing to forcibly remove me. But Patricia's lawyer had managed to file for an emergency guardianship hearing, claiming I was a danger to myself and others. Now we had less than 30 minutes before Judge Harrison would decide my fate. Remember, Mr. Lancaster said as we approached the courtroom, Patricia doesn't know how much evidence we have. Let her present her case first. Give her enough rope to hang herself. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate, and therefore more intimidating. Judge Harrison, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes behind steel-rimmed glasses, was already seated. She looked tired, probably pulled from her breakfast to deal with our emergency motion, but her gaze was alert as she reviewed the papers before her. Patricia entered moments later, flanked by Marcus and a man in an expensive suit who could only be their lawyer, Richard Stern. Patricia had transformed herself for the occasion. Gone was the disheveled woman from yesterday. She wore a conservative gray dress, her hair pulled back in a modest bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. The concerned stepmother worried sick about her troubled stepdaughter. "By your honor," Stern began as soon as we were seated, "we're here on an urgent matter of family safety. Mrs. Winters has been forced to take this drastic action to protect her stepdaughter Anne-Marie from herself." The young woman has been exhibiting signs of severe mental deterioration, making threats, experiencing paranoid delusions, and engaging in dangerous behavior. He produced a stack of documents with theatrical flair. We have sworn affidavits from concerned family members, documentation of erratic behavior, and a professional medical opinion recommending immediate intervention for Miss Winters's own safety. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, the picture of maternal distress. Your Honor, I've tried everything to help Anne-Marie. Since her father's death, she's been spiraling. She's convinced I'm part of some conspiracy to steal her inheritance. She's been stalking me, making wild accusations, frightening her younger sister. Last night, she broke into our home and stole private documents. Oh, these are serious allegations, Judge Harrison said, examining the papers. Dr. Brennan, I see you've provided a medical opinion without examining the patient. A thin man I recognized from the morning's confrontation stood up. Your Honor, in cases of acute psychosis, family testimony can be sufficient for initial evaluation. The patient's refusal to seek treatment is itself symptomatic of her condition. I've reviewed the family's documentation and found clear indicators of paranoid personality disorder with delusional features. Interesting diagnosis, Judge Harrison murmured. And this website, AnneMarieMentalHealth.com, this documents her decline. Marcus stood eagerly. I created it, Your Honor, to track my stepsister's episodes. We needed documentation for her own good. The photos, they show a clear pattern of deterioration. The judge scrolled through a tablet, presumably reviewing the website. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. These posts date back months, yet you only sought intervention today. We hoped she would seek help voluntarily, Patricia answered smoothly, but last night's break-in showed us we couldn't wait any longer. She's a danger to herself and others. Ms. Winters, the judge addressed me directly. Do you have representation? Mr. Lancaster stood. James Lancaster, representing Anne-Marie Winters, Your Honor. We strongly contest these allegations and have evidence that this is an orchestrated attempt to gain control of my client's substantial trust fund. Of course he would say that, Patricia interjected. Anne-Marie has been poisoning people against me for years. Even her grandmother fell for her manipulations. The poor woman left video messages full of paranoid accusations before she died. Clearly, mental illness runs in the family. That was the opening we'd been waiting for. Mr. Lancaster smiled slightly. Your Honor, since Mrs. Winters has brought up Eleanor Winters' video testimony, we'd like to present it now along with additional evidence relevant to this hearing. Judge Harrison nodded. Proceed. The courtroom screen flickered to life and Eleanor's face appeared. Even in her final days, she commanded attention. Her voice, clear and precise, filled the room as she laid out Patricia's history of fraud, her forged nursing credentials, her pattern of targeting wealthy widowers. Patricia's carefully composed expression began to crack as Eleanor presented dates, facts, and evidence with devastating precision. This is exactly what I mean, Patricia said desperately. These delusions infected poor Eleanor's mind. She turned my stepdaughter against me with these fantasies. But Mr. Lancaster was already queuing up the next piece of evidence, the security footage from the bank. The judge watched Patricia attempting to transfer $8 million, heard her recorded words about pretty girls marrying rich and ugly ones deserving scraps. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat as his own voice echoed through the courtroom, already spending money that wasn't his. Your Honor, Stern objected, this footage was obtained without my client's consent and taken out of context. The context seems quite clear, Counselor, Judge Harrison replied dryly. Continue, Mr. Lancaster. We presented Chloe's recordings next, Patricia's voice plotting and planning, discussing medication doses and inheritance theft. The courtroom grew colder with each revelation. Dr. Brennan had gone pale, perhaps, realizing he'd allied himself with criminals rather than a concerned family. These recordings were made by a minor with emotional problems, Patricia argued, but her voice had lost its confident edge. Chloe has always been troubled, prone to fantasies. Then perhaps we should hear from her directly, the judge suggested. The doors opened and Chloe entered with a federal agent escort. She looked small but determined in her school uniform, clutching a folder of additional evidence. Her testimony was devastating in its simplicity. She spoke of years of witnessing Patricia's manipulations of documenting crimes because no one would believe a child's word against her mother's. "She's been coached," Patricia insisted. "This is all part of Anna Marie's delusions infecting an impressionable teenager." But the evidence kept coming. Financial records showing Patricia's theft, medical files documenting my father's suspicious symptoms, the hidden marriage certificates, the deaths of previous husbands, the network of predators Patricia belonged to, each piece built upon the last, creating an undeniable picture of serial fraud and murder. "Your Honor," a new voice interrupted from the gallery. A federal badge flashed as Agent Sarah Chen stood. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have relevant information. Mrs. Patricia Winters is currently under federal investigation for elder abuse fraud and suspected murder across multiple state lines. We were preparing to arrest her this morning when we learned of this hearing." Patricia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. I'm being framed by a mentally ill girl and her enablers. Your Honor, you can't seriously believe." "Mrs. Winters." Judge Harrison's voice cut through Patricia's protests like a blade. "I've seen quite enough. Not only am I denying your petition for guardianship, but I'm also issuing an immediate restraining order, preventing you from coming within 500 feet of Anne Marie Winters." She turned to Dr. Brennan. "As for you, doctor, I'll be referring your conduct to the medical board. Providing diagnoses without examination, particularly in support of what appears to be an elaborate fraud scheme, is a serious breach of medical ethics." "But the website," Marcus protested, "the evidence of her mental state." Mr. Lancaster produced a final piece of evidence. "Your Honor, our technical expert examined this website. It was created 48 hours ago with all posts backdated using sophisticated but detectable manipulation. Furthermore, the IP address traces directly to Marcus Winters' personal computer." The judge's expression hardened further. "So, we have fabricated evidence, forged medical documents, and an attempt to wrongfully commit a sane woman to steal her inheritance. Agent Chen, I believe you mentioned something about arrests." "Your Honor." Patricia's lawyer stammered, "My clients need time to respond to these allegations." "Your clients should have thought of that before attempting to perpetrate a fraud upon this court," Judge Harrison replied. She looked directly at Patricia, and her words carried the weight of judgment. "I've seen many cases of family disputes over money, Mrs. Winters, but rarely have I encountered such calculated cruelty, such elaborate deception. You didn't just try to steal from your stepdaughter. You tried to steal her freedom, her sanity, her very identity." Federal agents moved into position around Patricia and Marcus. Dr. Brennan was already edging toward the door, but an agent blocked his path. The reality of their situation finally seemed to sink in as handcuffs appeared. "You can't do this!" Patricia snarled, her mask finally dropping completely. "I know things about people in this city, important people. I'll destroy all of you." "I suspect those threats will be added to your charges," Judge Harrison observed calmly. "Court is adjourned." As the agents led Patricia and Marcus away, Patricia turned back one last time. The look she gave me was pure venom, a promise that this wasn't over. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of her. The law was on my side now, and more importantly, the truth was finally in the light. Chloe slipped her hand into mine as we watched her mother disappear into federal custody. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "The criminal part is just beginning," I told her honestly. "There will be trials, testimony, probably more revelations. But the fear..." The control she had over our lives. Yes, that's over. Mr. Lancaster gathered his papers with satisfaction. Your grandmother would be proud, Anne-Marie. Justice delayed but not denied. As we left the courthouse, the morning sun seemed brighter somehow. The world felt different when you weren't looking over your shoulder, when you weren't afraid of the very people who were supposed to protect you. Patricia had tried to bury me, but she'd forgotten one crucial truth. Sometimes the seeds you bury grow into trees strong enough to tear down everything you've built. The FBI field office buzzed with activity as Agent Sarah Chen led me through a maze of cubicles and evidence boards. It had been 48 hours since Patricia's arrest at the courthouse, and the scope of the investigation had exploded beyond anything we'd imagined. Federal agents from multiple states were converging on what they now called Operation Caretaker, and I found myself at the center of it all. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Winters," Agent Chen said, guiding me to a conference room where several agents were already assembled. The walls were covered with photos, documents, and connection lines that looked like a spider's web. Patricia's face sat at one junction, but she was far from alone. Dozens of other faces stared back, a gallery of predators who'd made careers out of destroying families. "What we're about to show you might be disturbing," Agent Chen warned, settling across from me, "but we need your help understanding the full extent of your stepmother's activities." She opened a thick file spreading documents across the table. Patricia Kowalski, also known as Patricia Winters, Patricia Coleman, Dolores Patterson, and at least 6 other aliases, active for 22 years across 11 states. What your grandmother uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. The first document was a timeline that made my stomach turn. Patricia's career in elder abuse stretched back to when she was barely 18, starting as a candy striper in a Detroit nursing home. Even then, there were suspicious deaths, missing items, families who complained but could never prove anything. She learned from someone. Another agent, Detective Morrison, added. He pointed to a photo of an older woman with cold eyes. Vera Kozlov, originally from Ukraine. She ran a home healthcare service that was actually a training ground for this kind of operation. Patricia was one of her students. Students. I couldn't hide my shock. "You mean this was organized like a school for murderers?" "More like an apprenticeship program," Agent Chen explained. "Kozlov taught them everything: how to identify targets, forge credentials, administer medications that mimic natural causes of death, manipulate legal documents. She even provided them with connections for fake medical licenses and references." They showed me Patricia's graduation photo from a legitimate nursing aid program, which she'd attended just long enough to learn medical terminology and procedures. Then documents showing how she'd upgraded those credentials through forgery, becoming a registered nurse on paper without completing any actual training. "Your father was her 4th victim that we can confirm." Detective Morrison continued, pulling out a chart. "But we believe there may be more. Harold Morrison, no relation to me, was her 2nd. We exhumed his body last year based on your grandmother's information. The toxicology results were enlightening." He slid a medical report across the table. The technical language was dense, but the conclusion was clear. Harold Morrison had been systematically poisoned with a cocktail of medications that would have appeared natural to anyone not looking for murder. Heart medications to cause palpitations, sedatives to prevent him from seeking help, blood thinners to ensure any fall would be catastrophic. This is her signature. Agent Chen pointed to specific drug combinations. "We've found the same pattern in all 4 confirmed victims, but here's where it gets worse. Patricia wasn't working alone." The wall chart suddenly made more sense as she began explaining the connections. Patricia was part of a network of at least 30 individuals across the country, all using similar methods, all sharing information and resources. They had lawyers who specialized in quick marriages and will changes, doctors who would provide prescriptions without questions, even funeral home directors who ensured quick cremations before anyone could request autopsies. Your stepbrother Marcus was being groomed to join the network, Morrison added. We found communications between him and other members' children. They're creating a second generation of predators. But Tiffany, I asked, remembering Marcus's girlfriend. Tiffany Brennan, Dr. Brennan's actual cousin, not the story they gave you, Chen confirmed. Her family has been part of this for years. The facility they wanted to commit you to. It's owned by the network. They've used it to dispose of inconvenient family members who got too curious about their elderly relatives' deaths. My blood ran cold. The facility wasn't just for controlling me, it was potentially a death trap. How many people had been committed there and never returned? How many families had been told their loved ones had died of natural causes while institutionalized? We need to discuss your mother, Agent Chen said gently, pulling out another file. We know this is sensitive, but we found connections. The file contained my mother's medical records from before her death. I'd never seen them before. My father had always said it was too painful to keep reminders. But here, they were showing symptoms that now seemed horrifyingly familiar. Unexplained fatigue, heart irregularities, confusion, all starting about 6 months before the car accident that killed her. Vladimir Petrov. Morrison pointed to an employment record, worked at the hospital where your mother was treated. He was Vera Kozlov's nephew, one of her first protégés. We believe he was poisoning your mother, but she died in the accident before he could complete the job. The accident that might not have been an accident, Chen added carefully. She was driving to a lawyer's office when she died. The lawyer later confirmed she'd made an appointment to discuss divorce proceedings and changing her will. The brake lines in her car showed signs of tampering, but it was attributed to poor maintenance at the time. I stared at my mother's photo, young and vibrant, unaware of the danger surrounding her. So Patricia didn't kill her, but she knew the people who did. We think Vladimir told Patricia about your family's wealth during one of their network meetings, Chen explained. Your father became a target because they already knew he would be vulnerable. They had inside information about his financial status, his emotional state, even his daily routines from your mother's medical records. The conspiracy was staggering in its scope. This wasn't just about greedy individuals taking advantage of the elderly. This was organized crime on a level I couldn't have imagined, a murder-for-profit ring that had operated for decades with impunity. Why didn't anyone catch them sooner? I had to ask. Morrison's expression was grim. Because they were smart. They spread out geographically, never too many deaths in one area. They targeted people without close families or whose families were estranged. They used medications that metabolize quickly, leaving little trace. And when questions were raised, they had network members in positions to shut down investigations. Your grandmother was the first to connect the dots, Chen added. She hired private investigators who noticed patterns others missed. She funded database searches that linked deaths across state lines. And most importantly, she found Robert Chen, my colleague's father, who survived an attempted murder and was willing to testify. She pulled up a video call on her laptop. The man who appeared on screen was thin but alert, with eyes that had seen too much. Robert Chen's story was both heartbreaking and inspiring. He'd been a successful technology executive when he met Patricia at a grief support group after his wife's death. She'd played the role of caring friend, slowly inserting herself into his life. I started getting sick about 3 months after we started dating, he explained through the video link. She was so attentive, so concerned. She moved in to take care of me, managed my medications, even got power of attorney when I became too weak to handle my affairs. I would have died if my son hadn't made a surprise visit from college. His son had found him nearly comatose, immediately called paramedics, and insisted on full toxicology screening, despite Patricia's protest that it was unnecessary. The results had shown lethal levels of multiple medications. Patricia had fled before police could arrive, leaving behind evidence that helped uncover her true identity. I played dead, Robert continued. Let her think she'd won, that I was too damaged to be a threat. Your grandmother found me through the police report my son filed. She funded my disappearance, my new identity, and our investigation. For 5 years, we've been building this case. But we needed someone on the inside, Agent Chen explained. Someone the network would target who could document their methods in real time. Your grandmother volunteered you without your knowledge. The trust fund was bait. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor had known Patricia would come after me. She'd counted on it, turned me into bait for a trap years in the making. Part of me felt betrayed, but another part understood. How else could they have gathered evidence against such a careful network? We have arrest warrants for 18 members so far, Morrison said, showing me a stack of documents. Patricia and Marcus were just the beginning. Raids are happening across the country as we speak. Vera Kozlov was arrested in Miami this morning. Vladimir Petrov is in custody in Los Angeles. The network is unraveling. What do you need from me? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Testimony, Chen said simply. You're our key witness. You have personal experience, documented evidence, and crucially, you survived. Juries need to see that to understand these aren't just statistics, but real families destroyed by greed. She showed me photos of other victims, elderly faces, smiling unaware at their killers. Harold Morrison on his wedding day with Patricia. Robert Chen, weak and pale in a hospital bed. My father in his final months, his eyes already showing the fog of too much medication. And my mother, young and beautiful, who might have been the network's first attempt at our family's wealth. There's one more thing, Morrison added reluctantly. Patricia's been talking since her arrest. She wants a deal. She's offering to expose the entire network, including members we haven't identified yet, in exchange for a reduced sentence. No. The word came out harder than I intended. She doesn't get to negotiate her way out of this. That's ultimately the prosecutor's decision, Chen said gently, but your victim impact statement will carry significant weight. The U.S. attorney is very aware of what Patricia put your family through. I thought of my father's final recording, weak but determined to expose the truth. Of Eleanor spending her last years planning justice from beyond the grave. Of all the families who'd never know their loved ones were murdered, who'd buried victims thinking nature had simply taken its course. I'll testify, I said firmly, against all of them, whatever you need. As the agents began preparing briefings and documentation, I noticed a familiar name on one of the network charts. Dr. Sarah Whitman, affiliated with 3 suspicious deaths in Boston. She was also listed as Chloe's pediatrician, the one who diagnosed all her supposed emotional problems. Agent Chen, I called, pointing to the connection. I think you need to look into Chloe's medical records. Patricia may have been setting her up as a future victim, too. The implications sent a chill through the room. The network didn't just target the elderly, they groomed their own children as either accomplices or eventual victims. The evil of it was breathtaking in its scope, a generational system of murder and theft that might have continued indefinitely without Eleanor's intervention. As I left the FBI office hours later, my head spinning with revelations, one thought kept returning. Patricia had called my kindness. Weakness had mocked my faith in justice and truth, but she'd failed to understand something fundamental. Sometimes the greatest strength is refusing to become like those who hurt you. The network had built their empire on exploiting trust, love, and family bonds. Now those same bonds would be their downfall as survivors, and families united to ensure justice was served. Patricia thought she was playing a long game, but she never imagined someone would play a longer one. Eleanor had, and through her courage and foresight, the seeds of justice she'd planted were finally bearing fruit. The federal marshal's sirens wailed through the morning traffic as we raced across the city in a convoy of black SUVs. Agent Chen sat beside me, her phone buzzing constantly with updates from units deployed across the country. Patricia and Marcus had made bail just 2 hours ago, a network lawyer appearing with cash before anyone expected. Now they were running, and we had minutes, maybe less, to stop them from disappearing forever. Well, they're heading for the private airfield, Chen reported, reading her screen. Tower confirms a Gulfstream filed a flight plan to Grand Cayman 15 minutes ago. Pilots doing pre-flight checks. My hands gripped the folder in my lap, filled with freeze orders for every account we'd identified. But Patricia had 20 years of experience hiding money. For every account we'd found, there might be 2 more we'd missed. If she made it to the Cayman Islands, she'd vanish into the protection of international banking laws and non-extradition treaties. Units are converging on their known safety deposit boxes. Detective Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. First National reported them leaving 12 minutes ago. Security footage shows them carrying multiple bags. Through the window, I watched the city blur past ordinary people living ordinary lives while we chased serial killers through their midst. My phone vibrated with a text from Chloe, Mom's storage unit on Riverside. Saw her there last month, Unit 447. I showed Chen, who immediately radioed the information to another team. Every second counted now. The network's collapse had triggered a massive flight response members scrambling to grab hidden assets and disappear before arrest warrants caught up with them. There. Morrison pointed ahead, where a silver Mercedes was weaving through traffic at dangerous speeds. Marcus was driving, his face visible through the rear window as he checked for pursuit. Patricia sat beside him, phone pressed to her ear, probably coordinating with other fleeing members. They're heading for the marina, Chen realized as the Mercedes took a hard right toward the waterfront. Forget the airfield, they've got a boat waiting. The convoy split, half continuing to the airfield in case it was a feint, our SUVs following the Mercedes toward the harbor. The morning fog was lifting off the water, revealing dozens of vessels from small sailboats to massive yachts. Any one of them could be Patricia's escape route. My phone rang, Mr. Lancaster's name appearing. Anne-Marie, I've got something. Patricia accessed a trust account in Chloe's name this morning, one that wasn't on our radar. She pulled $3 million in bearer bonds. Bearer bonds? I put him on speaker so Chen could hear. Those still exist. Older ones purchased years ago, he explained, completely untraceable once they leave the country. She's been planning this exit strategy for a long time. The Mercedes screeched into the marina parking lot, Patricia and Marcus abandoning it with doors still open. They ran toward the docks bags, weighing them down but not slowing their desperate sprint. We were seconds behind agents spilling out of vehicles with weapons drawn. Once federal agents, stop where you are. But they kept running, Patricia's heels clicking on the wooden pier as she headed for a sleek yacht at the far end. The name, New Beginnings, was painted on its hull, the same boat Marcus had fantasized about buying with my trust fund. They'd already purchased it, probably with stolen money from previous victims. The boat's registered to a shell company in Panama, Chen said, reading from her phone as we ran. If they make international waters, jurisdiction gets complicated. We reached the pier as Marcus was casting off lines. The yacht's engines were already running, a crew member visible in the pilot house. Patricia stood at the stern, and for a moment our eyes met across the widening gap of water. Her expression was hard to read, rage certainly, but also something like respect. I'd proven a worthier opponent than she'd expected. Going somewhere? Patricia, a voice called from the yacht's cabin. She spun around as Robert Chen emerged, very much alive and holding a FBI badge. Behind him, federal agents appeared from below decks where they'd been waiting. The trap was sprung, and Patricia's face showed she knew it. "That's not possible," she breathed. "You're supposed to be..." Robert smiled grimly. "You should have made sure of that. Vera Kozlov always said you were sloppy with details." Marcus tried to jump overboard, but an agent caught him before he hit the water. Patricia stood frozen as handcuffs clicked around her wrists for the second time. But this time, there would be no bail, no network lawyer with ready cash. The bonds in her bag were evidence, now proof of flight risk that would keep her locked up until trial. "You knew," Patricia said, looking at me as agents led her off the yacht. "You knew we'd run to the boat." "Chloe knew," I corrected. "She heard you and Marcus discussing it last week. The storage unit, the bonds, the boat, even the crew member you'd bribed. She documented everything." The mention of her daughter made Patricia's mask finally crack completely. "That ungrateful little brat. After everything I've done for her—" "You mean everything you've done to her," I shot back. "Drugging her, gaslighting her, preparing to either recruit her or eliminate her when she became inconvenient. She knows everything, Patricia, and she chose justice over you." As they led Patricia past me, she stopped for one last moment. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said, and it didn't sound like a compliment. "You're just like her. Cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice anything for your precious justice." "No," I said quietly. "I'm nothing like you. That's what you never understood. Grandmother didn't sacrifice me. She protected me. She gave me the tools to fight back, trusted me to be strong enough to use them. That's what family really does." Patricia laughed bitterly. "Family? You still believe in fairy tales. Your family is dead, Anne-Marie. Your mother, your father, your grandmother, all gone. You've got nothing but money and ghosts." "I have Chloe," I reminded her. "Your daughter who chose truth over blood. I have Mr. Lancaster who protected my interests for years without stealing a penny. I have Agent Chen and everyone working to stop predators like you. That's more family than you'll ever understand." The agents moved her along then, but her words lingered. Was she right? Had I become cold and calculating in pursuit of justice? Had Eleanor's long game turned me into something harder than I'd been? "Don't let her get in your head," Chen advised, watching Patricia being placed in a federal vehicle. "Manipulators always try to make their victims question themselves. It's their last weapon when everything else fails." We spent the next hours at the marina cataloging evidence from the yacht. The bearer bonds were just the beginning. Hidden compartments revealed cash in multiple currencies, fake passports for Patricia and Marcus under new names, and detailed plans for establishing new identities in non-extradition countries. Most damning was a laptop containing Patricia's real records, not the sanitized version she showed accomplices, but the true accounting of her crimes. 23 victims over 20 years, their names and death dates recorded like trophies. The amounts stolen ranged from thousands to millions, all carefully tracked and tabulated. My father's entry made me sick. William Winters, 2.3 more liquid $8 trust failed $400K life insurance. Method digoxin, Ambien cocktail. Disposal cremation. Time investment 24 months. Rating 7/10. Daughter problematic but manageable. He was just a score to her, a rating based on difficulty and profit. My mother appeared in a separate section labeled Opportunities Lost with a note. Vladimir fumbled this one. Should have waited for natural causes instead of forcing accident. Lost access to $15 million estate. This laptop is a prosecutor's dream. Morrison said, photographing each page. She documented everything, probably for bragging rights within the network. Names, dates, methods, even critiques of other members' techniques. The most chilling section was labeled Future Projects. My name appeared at the top, with detailed plans for my commitment and eventual death in the facility. But below that were other names Chloe scheduled for recruitment or elimination at 18. 3 elderly men from Patricia's volunteer work at the hospice, already being groomed. Even Marcus had a question mark next to his name, suggesting Patricia would have eventually turned on her own son if it proved profitable. "She never stops," Chen observed. "Even while planning to flee, she was identifying new victims. It's pathological." By the time we finished processing, the yacht, news of the arrests was breaking nationwide. 28 members of the network were in custody, with more being identified every hour as arrested members traded information for leniency. Vera Kozlov, the mastermind who'd trained them all, was fighting extradition from Florida, but her capture had sent shockwaves through the remaining members. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting statements, lawyers offering to represent me in civil suits against Patricia's hidden assets, even movie producers sensing a profitable tragedy to exploit. I ignored them all, focused on the work still ahead. "We need you to look at something," Chen said as we headed back to the FBI office. She showed me a message on her phone from the team at Patricia's storage unit. They found something unexpected. The photo showed boxes of documents and photographs, but also something else: urns. 3 of them labeled with names I didn't recognize. Other victims, perhaps, whose bodies Patricia had kept as some kind of sick trophy. Or were these the remains of family members she'd claimed had died naturally? "We'll need DNA testing," Chen explained, "but based on the names and dates, we think these might be victims who were supposed to have been cremated and scattered. Patricia kept them instead. We don't know why." I thought I knew. Control. Patricia's entire life was about control, taking it from others, wielding it like a weapon. Even in death, she couldn't let her victims go free. She had to own them, possess them, keep them as proof of her power over life and death. The storage unit yielded more evidence over the following hours. Financial records for accounts we hadn't found, correspondence with network members we hadn't identified, even a journal where Patricia critiqued her own performance and planned improvements for future murders. She'd turned killing into a science complete with peer review and continuous improvement strategies. As the sun set over the city, I stood in the FBI conference room looking at the wall of victims. Their faces stared back, silent witnesses to crimes that had gone undetected for decades. Tomorrow would begin the long process of justice trials, testimony, the slow grinding wheels of the legal system. But today, we'd stop the killing. The network was broken, its members scattered and arrested, their secrets exposed. "Your grandmother did this," Chen said, joining me at the wall. "Without her, they'd still be out there. Patricia would have your trust fund, you'd be locked away or dead, and the killing would continue for another generation." I touched Eleanor's photo on the wall, not as a victim, but as the architect of the network's downfall. She'd played a longer game than any of them, sacrificing her final years to building an unassailable case. She'd trusted me to be strong enough to survive Patricia's assault, smart enough to use the tools she'd left behind, and brave enough to see justice through. "Thank you," I whispered to her image, "for everything." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Patricia would try to make deals, other network members would attempt to flee or fight back, and the full scope of their crimes would take years to unravel. But tonight, Chloe was safe in my apartment. Patricia was in federal custody, and 2 decades of murder had finally ended. The seeds Eleanor had planted in darkness had grown into something powerful enough to bring down an empire of death. And while Patricia was right that I'd lost my biological family, she was wrong about what I'd gained. I had a sister in Chloe, a mentor in Mr. Lancaster, allies in law enforcement, and the knowledge that together we'd saved countless future victims from Patricia's fate. Sometimes justice isn't about becoming cold or calculating. Sometimes it's about becoming strong enough to stand against evil, wise enough to see through deception, and brave enough to fight for those who can no longer fight for themselves. Eleanor had taught me that, and now Patricia would learn it too, one day at a time, for the rest of her life behind bars. The private airfield sat isolated among empty fields, its single runway stretching toward mountains that looked purple in the fading light. We tracked Patricia and Marcus here after their yacht escape failed, following a tip from a network member trying to bargain for immunity. The Gulf Stream waited on the tarmac engines, whining ready to carry them beyond justice's reach. "They're in the hangar," Agent Chen confirmed through my earpiece. "Thermal imaging shows 2 people, possibly 3. Approach with extreme caution." I shouldn't have been there. Civilians had no place in federal operations, but Chen had made an exception. Sometimes perpetrators need to face their victims, she'd explained. It can break through their delusions, make them realize their crimes have human costs. More importantly, I knew Patricia better than anyone. If negotiations failed, I might be the key to preventing violence. The hangar doors stood partially open, spilling yellow light onto the cracked concrete. Inside, I could see movement shadows pacing behind stacked crates. Patricia's voice carried on the wind, high and strained, arguing with someone. Marcus responded, his tone aggressive and desperate. They were turning on each other, the partnership of convenience, finally fracturing under pressure. "Anne-Marie, you don't have to do this," Detective Morrison said from beside me. "We have the building surrounded. They'll surrender eventually." But I was already walking forward, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. The hangar smelled of motor oil and desperation, the kind of place where bad plans went to die. Patricia stood near a table covered with cash and documents. Her perfect appearance finally shattered. Her hair hung limp, her designer suit was wrinkled and stained, and her face showed every one of her 47 years without the armor of careful makeup. "Come to gloat," she snarled when she saw me. "Come to watch the mighty fall." "I came to understand," I said honestly. "After everything you've done, all the lives you've destroyed, I need to know why. What broke inside you to make you this way?" Marcus laughed bitterly from where he slumped against a crate. "She doesn't need a reason. She just likes hurting people. Always has, since I was little. You know what my earliest memory is. Her teaching me to lie about bruises to my kindergarten teacher." "Shut up," Patricia snapped at him. "You were happy enough to help when money was involved. Don't pretend you're innocent now." "I learned from the best," he shot back. "Manipulation, greed, treating people like ATMs. You programmed me like a computer mother. Input, corruption, output, corruption. Are you proud of what you created?" The federal agents were moving into position outside, but I kept my focus on Patricia. Behind her bravado, I could see fear creeping in. The reality of capture, of consequences she'd avoided for 2 decades, was finally sinking in. "You want to know why?" Patricia said suddenly, her voice dropping into something raw and honest. "Fine, you deserve that much, I suppose. My mother cleaned houses for rich families like yours, spent her life on her knees scrubbing their floors while they complained about stock portfolios and vacation homes. She died at 53, worn out and broken with nothing to show for it but arthritis and debt." She moved to the table, fingers trailing over the scattered cash. I watched her beg for a raise from Mrs. Morrison, Harold's first wife. The woman laughed, said, "If my mother wanted more money, she should have gotten an education." That night, I promised myself I'd never beg for anything, I'd take what I deserved. "So you became what you hated," I observed, "someone who exploits others' labor and trust." "I became a survivor," Patricia corrected sharply. "Every old man I married had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. They were going to die anyway. Why should their ungrateful families inherit fortunes they didn't earn while people like my mother died in poverty?" "People like my father," I challenged. "He earned his wealth through decades of building his business. He wasn't some trust fund baby. He worked for everything he had." Patricia's laugh was bitter. "Your father was the worst kind. Self-made, he called himself, as if anyone makes it alone. He forgot about all the employees he underpaid, all the competitors he crushed, all the people who helped him along the way. At least inherited wealth is honest about its unfairness." You're justifying murder." Agent Chen's voice came from the hangar entrance. She stepped into view, weapon holstered, but hand resting on it. "No amount of childhood poverty excuses what you've done." "I don't need your judgment," Patricia spat. "You think the system works? You think justice exists for people like me. I created my own justice, balanced the scales my own way. By becoming a serial killer," Chen stated flatly. 23 confirmed victims. How is that justice?" Patricia's composure cracked further. They were all gonna die. I just hastened things, made their final months comfortable. They died thinking someone loved them. That's more than most people get. My father died thinking his wife was poisoning him, I said quietly. His last recordings show he knew exactly what you were doing. He died in fear and betrayal, unable to save himself or warn others. How is that comfortable? The words hit home. Patricia flinched, her carefully constructed justifications wavering. For perhaps the first time she was seeing her crimes through her victim's eyes, instead of her own warped perspective. I gave him everything, she said weakly. I was the perfect wife for 2 years. Cooked his meals, managed his medications, listened to his boring stories about the old days. I earned that money. You stole that money? Marcus interrupted, surprising everyone. Just like you stole my childhood, my sense of right and wrong, my ability to have normal relationships. Do you know what it's like growing up knowing your mother is a killer? Knowing that every kind word might be manipulation, every gesture might be practice for the next mark. Patricia turned on him with venom. I gave you everything you wanted. Private schools, cars, clothes opportunities I never had. You lived like a prince while other kids scraped by. I lived like your accomplice, Marcus shot back. You made me complicit before I was old enough to understand. Remember when I was 8 and you had me befriend Harold Morrison's grandson, told me to find out about his grandfather's health, his money, his habits. I thought it was a game until Harold died, and you bought me a PlayStation with his money. The dynamic between them was shifting, years of suppressed resentment finally surfacing. Marcus wasn't just her accomplice. He was another victim groomed from birth to participate in crimes he couldn't fully comprehend until it was too late. You have a choice now, Marcus, I said carefully. You can keep running with her or you can choose a different path. It's not too late to do the right thing. He looked between Patricia and me, conflict clear on his face. She's my mother, he said helplessly. Whatever she's done, she's still my mother. No, a clear voice said from the hangar entrance. She's our biological parent. There's a difference. Chloe walked in flanked by federal agents, but clearly there by choice. She looked small but determined, her school uniform replaced by jeans and a sweater that made her look her age for once. Her eyes were fixed on Patricia with a mixture of sadness and resolution. Chloe, Patricia's voice broke. What are you doing here? Ending this, Chloe said simply. I've spent 4 years collecting evidence because I knew this day would come. The day you'd run and I'd have to choose between family and justice. But you made that choice easy, Mom. You were never really family. Family doesn't prepare to murder you when you become inconvenient. She pulled out a tablet showing a video I hadn't seen before. Patricia in Chloe's room late at night, standing over her sleeping daughter with a syringe in hand. She stood there for long minutes, clearly debating before finally leaving without using it. The timestamp showed this was just last month. You were going to kill me, Chloe said, her voice steady, despite tears streaming down her face. Your own daughter, because I knew too much, asked too many questions. That's not love, Mom. That's ownership. Patricia stared at the video, her last defenses crumbling. I couldn't. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The network was asking questions about you, wondering if you were a liability. I had to consider all options. You considered murdering your 16-year-old daughter, Chen stated. There's no justifying that, Patricia. No tragic backstory that makes that acceptable. The fight went out of Patricia, then her shoulders slumping in defeat. The weight of her crimes, the reality of what she'd become, seemed to crash over her all at once. She sank into a chair, suddenly looking far older than her years. I used to be different, she whispered. When Marcus was born, I promised I'd give him better than I had. Somewhere along the way, better became more and more, became everything, and everything became this. It became murder, I said firmly. It became destroying families, stealing futures, betraying everyone who trusted you. You had choices every step of the way, Patricia. You chose greed over humanity every single time. She looked up at me then, and for a moment I saw not the predator, but the broken person underneath. Your grandmother knew, didn't she, from the very beginning. She saw right through me. She saw who you really were, I confirmed. But she also saw who you could have been. That's why she gathered evidence instead of just having you killed. She believed in justice, not vengeance. Even for you. Vera would have had me killed, Patricia said quietly, referring to her mentor. If she knew I'd been compromised, if she thought I might expose the network. That's how we handled problems. Your grandmother was either very noble or very cruel to keep me alive. She was just, Agent Chen interjected. Now it's time for you to face that justice. Patricia Winters, you're under arrest for multiple counts of murder fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. As the agents moved in with handcuffs, Patricia looked at her children one last time. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I did love you both. In my own broken way. That's the tragedy, Chloe replied. You probably did, but you loved money and control more. They led Patricia away, then her empire of death finally ended. Marcus went willingly looking, almost relieved to have the running stop. The cash on the table would be evidence. Now the plane would be impounded, and 2 decades of murder would finally face judgment. But as I stood in that hangar with Chloe, surrounded by the wreckage of Patricia's plans, I thought about her words. How does someone go from a child watching their mother struggle to a serial killer targeting the elderly? What breaks in a person to make them see human lives as mere obstacles to wealth? Do you think she was always evil? Chloe asked, as if reading my thoughts. Or did she become that way? I think she made choices, I said carefully, each one leading to the next, until she was so far down a dark path she couldn't see any other way. But they were still choices. She could have stopped at any point chosen differently. She didn't. We walked out of the hangar together, leaving the crime scene techs to their work. Outside, the Gulf Stream sat silent on the tarmac, its escape to nowhere canceled permanently. In the distance, I could see the lights of the city where normal people lived, normal lives unaware of the darkness we'd just conquered. What happens now? Chloe asked as we reached the federal vehicles. Now we heal, I told her. We testify. We make sure she can never hurt anyone again. And we try to build something better from the ashes of what she destroyed. As we drove away from the airfield, I thought about Patricia's question. Was Eleanor noble or cruel to keep her alive for justice? I decided she was neither. She was simply right. Death would have been an escape for Patricia. Now she would face her victim's family's answer for each life stolen, each future destroyed. She would live with the consequences of her choices every day for the rest of her life. And that, more than any revenge, was true justice. The secure video connection flickered to life in the FBI conference room, revealing a face I'd only seen in old photographs. Robert Chen looked healthier than when he'd appeared on the boat, the stress of hiding finally lifting from his features. Behind him, I could see a modest apartment, nothing like the tech executive lifestyle he'd once enjoyed, but safe and peaceful. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us again, Mr. Chen. Agent Sarah Chen said, though they shared no relation despite the common surname. Your testimony will be crucial for the prosecution. Robert nodded his eyes, finding mine through the screen. Ms. Winters, I want to start by saying how sorry I am about your father. If I had come forward sooner, perhaps... You were protecting yourself, I interrupted gently. Patricia would have killed you if she'd known you survived. You did what you had to do. He smiled sadly. Your grandmother said something similar when she found me. She had a way of cutting through guilt to find purpose. Without her support, I would have given up years ago. Agent Chen pulled up files on her laptop. Mr. Chen, can you walk us through your experience with Patricia? The prosecution needs detailed timeline and methods. Robert took a breath, visibly steeling himself. I met her at a grief support group in San Francisco. My wife had died of cancer 6 months earlier, and I was lost. Patricia introduced herself as a hospice nurse who'd cared for one of the group members' relatives. She was kind, understanding everything a grieving person needed to hear. The parallels to my father's story were eerie. Patricia had perfected her approach over years, knowing exactly how to exploit grief and loneliness. She'd studied her victims' psychology as carefully as their bank accounts. She started small, Robert continued. Coffee after meetings, then dinners. She never pushed, never seemed interested in my money. That was part of her genius. She made me pursue her, made me feel like I was lucky she gave me a chance. By the time we were dating seriously, I thought it was all my idea. When did you start getting sick? Detective Morrison asked, taking notes. About 3 months in, just fatigue at first, which she attributed to grief and overwork. She moved in to take care of me, so devoted and concerned. She managed my medications, cooked special meals to help my strength, even took time off work to nurse me. My friends thought I was lucky to find someone so caring. He pulled up his own records, medical files he'd managed to save. Looking back, the pattern is obvious. She was testing different drug combinations, noting my reactions, adjusting doses. I was an experiment in murder, and I was too sick to see it. The files showed a terrifying progression. Mild sedatives escalating to heart medications, blood thinners added to create bruising, and bleeding stimulants to cause anxiety that required more sedatives. A carefully orchestrated spiral designed to look like natural decline while keeping the victim dependent on their killer. The night my son saved my life, I was on 14 different medications, Robert said. My heart rate was 30 beats per minute. Any lower, and I would have slipped away in my sleep, which was exactly her plan. She'd already had me sign power of attorney update my will. I was worth $12 million dead, and nothing but trouble alive. Tell us about that night, Agent Chen prompted. Jeremy, my son, was supposed to be at Stanford for finals, but he'd been worried about me, decided to drive home and surprise me. Patricia didn't know he was coming. He found me barely conscious, called 911 over her protests. She tried to convince him I was just tired, that hospitals would make me worse. But Jeremy's studying pre-med. He recognized the symptoms of overdose. The emotion in his voice was raw, even after years. A father's gratitude for a son who trusted his instincts over a seemingly caring woman's assurances. That split-second decision had saved Robert's life and eventually exposed Patricia's entire network. The hospital ran toxicology screens despite Patricia insisting they weren't necessary, Robert continued. The results were shocking. Lethal levels of multiple medications, many I didn't even know I was taking. Patricia had fled by the time police arrived at the hospital, left everything behind, and vanished. That's when you decided to play dead, Morrison asked. Robert nodded. The police said she'd likely try again if she knew I survived. They suggested witness protection, but I wanted more. I wanted to understand how she'd done it, who else she might be targeting. So we staged my death complete with obituary and funeral. Jeremy played the grieving son perfectly while I recovered in hiding. How did Eleanor find you? I asked, curious about my grandmother's detective work. She didn't find me. I found her, Robert corrected. I'd been investigating Patricia for 2 years when I discovered she'd married again. Your father. I tried to warn him anonymously, but Patricia intercepted my messages. So I reached out to Eleanor instead. She was the only family member Patricia couldn't isolate or control. He showed us correspondence between him and Eleanor, careful exchanges through encrypted channels. They'd built trust, slowly sharing information and resources. Eleanor had funded his investigation, while he provided insider knowledge of Patricia's methods. Your grandmother was remarkable, Robert said warmly. She turned her pain into purpose. While grieving her son, she built a network to catch his killer. She recruited private investigators, forensic accountants, even reformed criminals who understood how predators think. All funded quietly through charitable trusts Patricia never suspected. Agent Chen pulled up more files. Mr. Chen, you mentioned Patricia was part of a larger network. Can you tell us about that? Robert's expression darkened. The Kozlov Network, they called it. Vera Kozlov ran it like a corporation. Training programs for new recruits, resource sharing between members, even performance reviews. They had doctors who'd provide prescriptions, lawyers who'd handle quick marriages, and will changes funeral directors who'd ensure cremations before autopsies. A full-service murder enterprise. How many victims? Morrison asked quietly. Hundreds, possibly thousands, over 30 years, Robert replied. They targeted wealthy elderly with limited family connections. Nursing homes, grief support groups, senior centers, anywhere vulnerable people gathered. They had members embedded in hospitals, law firms, banks. Patricia was middle management successful, but not elite. Who was elite? Agent Chen pressed. Vera herself, of course. Vladimir Petrov, who'd been killing since the Soviet Union collapsed. A woman called Margaret Sterling, who specialized in tech billionaires. They competed for highest profit margins, most efficient killings, best territorial expansion. It was corporate murder complete with quarterly meetings and annual conventions disguised as healthcare conferences. The scope was staggering. We'd known Patricia was part of something larger, but this was organized crime on an international scale. Murder as a business model, complete with training support and profit-sharing structures. There's something else, Robert said reluctantly. Something I discovered recently that connects to your family directly, Ms. Winters. My heart rate spiked. What about my family? Your mother's death. I found communications between Vladimir Petrov and Vera Kozlov from that time period. Your mother wasn't randomly targeted. They'd been watching your family for years, waiting for an opportunity. Your parents' wealth, your grandmother's holdings, even future trust funds for unborn grandchildren. The Kozlov network marked your family as a multi-generational target. The room seemed to spin slightly. My entire family history had been shaped by these predators, decades of planning to strip us of everything. My mother's death, my father's murder, the attempt on me, all part of a business plan, drafted before I was even born. They called it the Winters Project, Robert continued gently. Projected value $45 million over 3 generations. Vladimir fumbled the first attempt with your mother, but Patricia succeeded with your father. You were meant to be the final phase. But Eleanor knew, Agent Chen said thoughtfully. Somehow, she figured out the bigger picture. She had help, Robert revealed. A man named Thomas Morrison, Harold Morrison's son. He'd suspected his father was murdered and spent years investigating. He found patterns, connected deaths, across state lines, identified network members. When Eleanor started her own investigation, their paths crossed. They pooled resources, shared information. Thomas died of a heart attack last year, but his work lives on in the evidence we've collected. I thought about all these shadow warriors fighting a war most people didn't even know existed. Eleanor, Robert, Thomas Morrison, and others dedicating their lives to stopping killers who operated in plain sight. They'd built their own network to counter Kozlov's trading justice for profit. The network is panicking, Robert added. Patricia's arrest triggered an avalanche. Members are fleeing, destroying evidence, trying to eliminate loose ends. But it's too late. We have their playbooks, their communication channels, their financial structures. Vera Kozlov was arrested this morning in Miami. Vladimir Petrov is negotiating a deal to testify against everyone. The Winters Project brought down the entire enterprise. My family's destruction led to their destruction, I said, slowly processing the irony. Your family's strength led to their destruction, Robert corrected. Eleanor could have hid and protected her remaining assets, kept you away from danger. Instead, she chose to fight. She turned tragedy into justice, not just for your family, but for hundreds of others. Patricia never understood that kind of courage. Agent Chen was typing rapidly. Mr. Chen, would you be willing to testify in person? Your first-hand experience would be powerful for the jury. I've been hiding for 5 years, Robert said firmly. It's time to stop. Yes, I'll testify. Patricia took everything from me. My health, my career, my sense of safety, but she didn't take my voice. It's time to use it. We discussed logistics for another hour, planning his testimony, arranging security, coordinating with prosecutors. But my mind kept returning to the Winters Project. My family hadn't just been victims. We'd been selected, stalked, and systematically destroyed by an organization that viewed murder as quarterly earnings. Can I ask you something? I said to Robert as the call was ending. Do you ever regret surviving, knowing what she did to others after you? His face reflected understanding of the survivor's guilt I was feeling every day. But Eleanor helped me see it differently. My survival meant evidence, preserved patterns, documented connections mapped. Every day I stayed hidden was another day building the case that would eventually stop them all. Guilt is natural, but purpose is chosen. Choose purpose. After the call ended, I sat in the empty conference room staring at the evidence walls. Photos of victims covered every surface, elderly faces smiling unknowingly at their killers. But now those photos would speak through us, the survivors and fighters who'd refused to let their deaths be meaningless. Chloe knocked and entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, she said, settling beside me. That was intense. He survived what Patricia did to Dad, I said quietly. He was lucky. No, Chloe corrected. He had a son who loved him enough to show up unexpectedly. Dad had us, but Patricia made sure we were always far away when it mattered. That's not about luck. It's about her calculating every variable. She learned from her mistakes with Robert. We sat in comfortable silence, processing the weight of what we learned. The Winters Project. My family's name attached to a murder conspiracy spanning decades. It was almost too much to comprehend. They picked the wrong family, Chloe said finally. Grandmother made sure of that, and now their own project files will convict them. There's poetry in that. She was right. The meticulous records that helped them target victims had become evidence of their crimes. Their corporate structure made them efficient killers, but also left paper trails leading directly to convictions. In trying to turn murder into business, they'd created their own downfall. Tomorrow would bring more revelations as arrested members traded information for deals. The network's full scope would emerge file by file, victim by victim. But tonight, I found comfort in Robert Chen's survival, in Thomas Morrison's dedication, in Eleanor's grand strategy, and in all the hidden warriors who'd fought this shadow war. Patricia thought she was hunting sheep. She never realized she'd walked into a den of lions, patient and prepared. The Winters Project had succeeded, just not the way she'd planned. It had brought Winter to an empire of death, freezing their operations and exposing them to the harsh light of justice. And that was Eleanor's greatest gift, turning our family's tragedy into the network's destruction. She'd made our name synonymous not with victimhood, but with the consequences of preying on the innocent. The Winters Project would be remembered, but as the beginning of the end for the Kozlov network. In that, at least, there was justice. The prosecutor's office felt like a war room 3 months after Patricia's arrest. Boxes of evidence lined every wall, whiteboards covered in timelines, and connections mapped out 2 decades of murder. Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Rodriguez moved between stations with fierce efficiency, building cases against 32 network members simultaneously while preparing for Patricia's trial as a centerpiece. We've got 18 guilty pleas so far, Rodriguez informed our assembled team. Lower-level members trading testimony for reduced sentences. But Patricia won't deal. She's maintaining complete innocence, claiming she's been framed by a conspiracy of bitter stepchildren and confused elderly victims. I sat at the conference table with Chloe, Mr. Lancaster, and Agent Chen reviewing witness lists that read like a catalog of destruction. Families from across the country had come forward recognizing their loved ones' deaths in the patterns we'd exposed. Each had a story of trust, betrayed inheritance stolen, and justice delayed. Her lawyer filed another motion this morning. Rodriguez continued sliding documents across the table. Richard Stern is arguing that Eleanor's video testimony should be excluded as hearsay, that Chloe's recordings were obtained illegally, and that Robert Chen's testimony is compromised by his alleged mental breakdown. Mental breakdown, Robert said from the doorway, entering with Jeremy at his side. Is that what we're calling attempted murder now? He looked healthier than in our video calls, months of freedom and therapy helping heal wounds Patricia had inflicted. But his eyes still carried the wariness of someone who'd been poisoned by a person they loved, a caution that might never fully fade. They're throwing everything at the wall, Rodriguez explained. Stern's good, one of the best defense attorneys in the country. Patricia's paying him with hidden funds we haven't traced yet. He's already assembled a team of expert witnesses to challenge our medical evidence. What's their defense strategy? Mr. Lancaster asked, reviewing Stern's latest filing. Multiple angles, Rodriguez replied. First, they claim Patricia was a devoted caregiver whose elderly husbands died of natural causes. Second, if any medications were improperly administered, it was due to innocent mistakes or following incorrect doctor's orders. Third, any financial transfers were gifts freely given or compensation for caregiving services. And if all that fails, Chen asked, then Patricia herself is a victim, Rodriguez said with disgust, manipulated by the real masterminds like Vera Kozlov, forced to participate under threat, suffering from Stockholm Syndrome or battered woman syndrome, or whatever psychological defense Stern can sell to a jury. The strategy was cynical, but potentially effective. Juries sometimes struggled with the concept of women as serial killers, preferring to see them as victims rather than predators. Patricia's carefully maintained appearance of the devoted stepmother could work in her favor if we weren't prepared to shatter that illusion completely. We need to establish pattern and intent, Rodriguez continued. Show this wasn't isolated or accidental, but systematic murder for profit. That's where your testimony becomes crucial, Anne-Marie. You're the one who got away, who can speak to her methods firsthand. I'd been preparing for months, but the weight of responsibility still felt crushing. My words could mean the difference between Patricia facing justice or walking free to kill again. The other victims couldn't speak for themselves, so I had to be their voice as well as my own. Walk me through your testimony again, Rodriguez requested. The jury needs to understand the progression from caring stepmother to attempted murder. I took a breath, organizing thoughts I'd reviewed countless times. Patricia spent 12 years playing the long game. She isolated my father, gradually presented herself as the only person who truly understood his grief. She convinced him to distance me supposedly for my own good. By the time she started poisoning him, I was away at college too far to notice the daily changes. The prosecution will argue you were estranged from your father, Rodriguez warned, that you're bitter about being cut out of his life and looking for someone to blame. I have his letters, I countered, hidden in books Patricia never bothered to read. He wrote to me constantly, even when she intercepted the mail. He documented feeling foggy, confused, worried about his memory. He suspected something was wrong but couldn't pinpoint what. Chloe pulled out her laptop. I have videos of Mom measuring his medications. She thought I was doing homework, but I was recording. You can see her adding extra pills, grinding them into his food. She even practiced her concerned wife act in the mirror when she thought no one was watching. The footage was damning, but Stern would challenge its authenticity and admissibility. We needed overwhelming evidence to counter every possible defense, to close every escape route Patricia might attempt. Let's discuss the other victims, Rodriguez said, pulling up files. We have confirmed murders going back 22 years, but the statute of limitations complicates prosecution for the earliest ones. We're focusing on 5 cases with the strongest evidence: Harold Morrison, Robert Chen's attempted murder, your father, William Winters, Gregory Patterson, and Michael Coleman. Each name represented a family destroyed wealth, stolen justice, delayed. Harold Morrison's son Thomas had spent his final years gathering evidence. Gregory Patterson's daughter had always suspected foul play but couldn't prove it until our investigation connected the dots. Michael Coleman's elderly sister had been told he died peacefully, never knowing he'd spent his last months in medicated terror. Marcus flipped yesterday, Agent Chen announced, checking her phone. Full cooperation in exchange for 15 years instead of life. He's providing recordings of Patricia planning your commitment, discussing methods with other network members, even practicing her testimony for this trial. The betrayal of her son should have been predictable, but it still shifted our strategy significantly. Marcus knew where bodies were buried literally and figuratively. His testimony would devastate any claim of Patricia's innocence or ignorance. What about Vera Kozlov? I asked. Has she agreed to testify? Rodriguez's expression soured. She's fighting extradition from Florida. Claims she's too elderly and ill to travel that prison would be a death sentence. Her lawyers are stalling, hoping Patricia's trial weakens our cases against other network members. She's the real mastermind, Robert added. Patricia was middle management, but Vera built the system. She recruited, trained, and managed dozens of killers over 30 years. If she escapes justice because of jurisdictional games... She won't, Rodriguez said firmly. If we can't bring her to trial, we'll try her in absentia. But first, we need convictions, starting with Patricia. She's our test case. If we can't convict her with all this evidence, the entire network prosecution falls apart. The pressure was immense. Hundreds of families counting on us, decades of murder demanding justice, future victims depending on us to stop the killing permanently. Patricia's trial would set precedents affecting every subsequent case. There's something else, Rodriguez said reluctantly. Stern submitted a witness list this morning. Patricia's calling character witnesses, including 3 elderly men from her hospice volunteering. They'll testify about her compassion and dedication to the dying. Future victims, Chloe said with disgust. She was grooming them while planning to flee the country. Now she'll use them as shields. The cynicism of it was breathtaking. Patricia would parade men she'd planned to murder as proof of her good character, knowing we couldn't reveal their intended fates without prejudicing the jury. Every kindness she'd shown them was investment in future profit, but they'd testify believing it was genuine care. We need our own character witnesses, Rodriguez decided. Staff from the houses where she worked, family members who saw through her facade, anyone who witnessed her true nature. I can help with that, a new voice offered from the doorway. Dr. Sarah Whitman entered, looking nervous but determined. I know I'm technically a defendant in related charges, but I want to make things right. I can testify about Patricia's requests for specific medications, her questions about undetectable poisons, her jokes about inheritance that weren't really jokes. Rodriguez studied her carefully. Your testimony could be powerful, but the defense will attack your credibility since you're trying to avoid prosecution yourself. I'll take that risk, Dr. Whitman said. I spent years enabling these monsters, prescribing medications I knew were suspicious, ignoring obvious patterns. Patricia promised me wealth and security, but all I got was guilt and complicity in murder. Let me help stop her. The room filled with similar offers over the following hours. Network members seeking deals, victims' families demanding to testify, even Patricia's former cellmate who'd heard her bragging about fooling everyone. The challenge wasn't finding witnesses, but selecting those who'd be most effective. Jury selection starts next week, Rodriguez announced as afternoon faded to evening. Stern will try to seat jurors sympathetic to older women, people who can't imagine a grandmother as a serial killer. We need jurors who can see past appearance to actions, who understand that evil doesn't always look like movie villains. What about publicity? Mr. Lancaster asked. The media coverage has been intense. Double-edged sword, Rodriguez admitted. It's educated the public about elder abuse and financial exploitation, but it's also created potential bias. Stern's already claiming Patricia can't get a fair trial, that media has painted her as guilty before evidence is presented. We spent hours discussing strategy, reviewing evidence, preparing for every possible defense tactic. But underneath the legal maneuvering lay a simple truth: Patricia had murdered for money repeatedly and without remorse. Our job was making 12 jurors see that truth clearly enough to convict. One more thing, Rodriguez said as we prepared to leave. Patricia requested to speak with you, Anna Marie, through her lawyer, claiming she has information about your mother's death that she'll only share with you. The room went silent. Everyone looked at me, waiting for my response to this obvious manipulation. Patricia's final card, using my mother's memory as leverage for some unknown purpose. It's a trap, Chloe said immediately. She's trying to get inside your head before testimony, make you emotional or uncertain. Probably, I agreed. But what if she actually knows something? What if there are more victims we haven't found? Rodriguez left the decision to me, though her expression showed clear skepticism. Agent Chen offered to accompany me if I chose to go. Mr. Lancaster advised against it from a legal standpoint. But ultimately, only I could decide whether to face Patricia one more time before trial. I'll think about it, I said finally. Right now we focus on preparation. She's had 20 years to perfect her lies. We have 3 months to perfect the truth. As we left the prosecutor's office, I thought about the journey from that morning at Lancaster's office to this moment. Patricia had tried to steal my inheritance, my freedom, my sanity. Instead, she'd created her own downfall, united victims across decades, and exposed an entire network of killers. The trial would be brutal. Stern would attack every piece of evidence, every witness, every moment of our case. Patricia would play the victim, the misunderstood caregiver, the scapegoat for larger criminals. Some jurors might even believe her. But we had truth on our side and the voices of 23 victims demanding justice. We had Eleanor's brilliant trap, Robert's survival, Chloe's courage, and hundreds of pages of evidence Patricia had created herself. Most importantly, we had the determination to see this through to the end. Patricia thought she was untouchable, protected by wealth and careful planning. She was about to learn that justice might move slowly, but it moves inevitably forward. And when it finally arrives, no amount of lies can stand against the truth spoken by those who refuse to be silenced. The war for justice was entering its final phase, and we were ready. The federal courthouse stood like a fortress of justice against the gray March sky as we arrived for the first day of Patricia's trial. Media vans lined the street, reporters shouting questions we didn't answer. Inside, the corridors hummed with nervous energy as victims' families, investigators, and legal teams converged on courtroom 7. Patricia sat at the defense table, looking every inch the grieving widow wrongfully accused. Stern had transformed her appearance, gray hair showing at the roots, minimal makeup, a simple black dress that suggested mourning rather than wealth. She kept her eyes, downcast hands folded as if in prayer, the picture of elderly innocence. All rise for the Honorable Judge Martha Chen, the bailiff announced. No relation to Agent Chen, but the coincidence of names seemed fitting. Judge Chen commanded immediate respect, her reputation for fairness matched only by her intolerance for courtroom theatrics. Maria Rodriguez opened for the prosecution with controlled fury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the woman before you is not what she seems. Patricia Winters presents herself as a devoted caregiver, a loving wife, a concerned stepmother. But evidence will show she is actually a serial killer who murdered for money, part of a nationwide network that has stolen millions while ending lives with calculated cruelty. She outlined the case methodically, 23 victims over 20 years, patterns of poisoning, disguised as natural death, financial exploitation hidden behind legal documents. The projected slides showed Patricia's many faces and names, the drugs she'd used, the money she'd stolen. Several jurors visibly recoiled at the scope. You'll hear from survivors like Robert Chen, poisoned nearly to death before his son's unexpected visit saved him. From Chloe Winters, who documented her mother's crimes for years while living in fear. From Anne-Marie Winters, who escaped commitment to a facility where inconvenient relatives disappear. Each will tell you how Patricia Winters destroys families for profit. Stern's opening painted a starkly different picture. Patricia Winters sits accused of monstrous crimes based on circumstantial evidence, family resentment, and prosecutorial overreach. Yes, she married older men. Yes, some of them died, as elderly people unfortunately do, but correlation is not causation, and grief is not guilt. He portrayed Patricia as a victim herself, growing up in poverty, working tirelessly as a caregiver, finding love with lonely widowers, only to be accused by greedy relatives when inheritance time came. Every piece of evidence had an innocent explanation, every witness had ulterior motives. The government wants you to believe in a vast conspiracy of killer nurses stalking the elderly, Stern continued, but Occam's razor suggests something simpler, a woman who dedicated her life to caring for the dying, now scapegoated by those who resent her legitimate inheritances. The battle lines were drawn. Over the following days, witnesses took the stand to chip away at Patricia's carefully constructed facade. Harold Morrison's son Thomas testified via video recorded before his death, detailing his father's suspicious symptoms and Patricia's resistance to medical intervention. She said hospitals would just run expensive tests, Thomas explained in the recording, that Dad was comfortable at home with her care, but I could see him declining daily. When I suggested a second opinion, she accused me of not trusting her, of trying to undermine their marriage. Stern attacked the dead man's credibility, suggesting Thomas had been motivated by inheritance disputes rather than genuine concern. But the jury watched Patricia's face during the testimony, saw her jaw tighten when Thomas described finding empty pill bottles hidden in the garage. Dr. Angela Foster, the medical examiner who'd reviewed the exhumed remains, provided devastating technical testimony. Harold Morrison's hair samples showed chronic exposure to digitalis far exceeding therapeutic doses. This wasn't accidental. Someone systematically poisoned him over months, carefully increasing doses as his body developed tolerance. The science was complex, but Dr. Foster made it accessible. She showed how Patricia's victims all displayed similar patterns, initial therapeutic doses escalating to toxic levels, multiple drug interactions creating dangerous symptoms, final doses timed to appear like natural cardiac events. Could these patterns occur accidentally? Rodriguez asked. The probability is essentially zero, Dr. Foster replied. This required knowledge of drug interactions, careful dose titration, and deliberate intent. This was murder disguised as medicine. Stern's cross-examination focused on the degradation of evidence over time, the possibility of contamination, the limits of forensic science. But Dr. Foster held firm, her expertise unshakable. The jury took notes, beginning to see patterns where Patricia hoped they'd see coincidence. Robert Chen's testimony electrified the courtroom. No longer hiding, he walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity. Every step, a defiance of Patricia's attempt to erase him. His account of systematic poisoning, of watching his body betray him, while Patricia played devoted girlfriend, brought several jurors to tears. I trusted her completely. Robert said, his voice steady despite visible emotion. She was so caring, so attentive. Even as I got sicker, I thought how lucky I was to have her. I was dying, and I was grateful to my killer for her kindness. Objection, Stern called. Prejudicial characterization. Oh, sustained, Judge Chen ruled. The jury will disregard the characterization. Please continue with facts, Mr. Chen. Robert detailed the medications, the symptoms, the slow descent into helplessness. He produced records he'd hidden before Patricia could destroy them, showing her practicing his signature researching untraceable poisons, corresponding with someone named VK about the project timeline. VK was Vera Kozlov, Robert explained, Patricia's mentor in murder. They discussed my declining health like a business venture, calculating how much longer before I'd sign final documents. Stern's cross-examination was brutal, attacking Robert's memory, his mental state during illness, his potential motivations for false testimony. But Robert remained unshakable, his survival, a living refutation of Patricia's innocence. You hated Patricia for leaving you, Stern suggested. I was relieved she left, Robert corrected. It saved my life. What I hate is that she went on to kill others, including Anne-Marie's father. My silence enabled more murders. That's why I'm here now. Marcus took the stand on day 4, and Patricia's mask finally cracked. Her son, her accomplice, her trained protege now testified against her in exchange for leniency. His testimony revealed the network's inner workings, Patricia's training in murder, her pleasure in successful kills. She called them harvest seasons, Marcus said, avoiding his mother's burning gaze. Each death was a harvest gathering what she'd cultivated. She kept scorecards rating victims by difficulty and profit. William Winters was a 7 out of 10, challenging but profitable. He produced Patricia's real records, hidden from even the network's scrutiny. Detailed notes on each victim, their weaknesses, their medication responses, their family dynamics. William Winters' entry was particularly chilling, documenting his growing suspicions and Patricia's countermeasures. She almost aborted the Winters project, Marcus revealed. William was getting too suspicious talking about reconciling with Eleanor, but she decided to accelerate instead, upping his doses before he could act on his concerns. You're lying, Patricia shouted, breaking her composed facade for the first time. You ungrateful bastard, everything I did was for you. Judge Chen gavelled for order, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Patricia's rage, the violence beneath her gentle exterior. Stern tried to recover during cross-examination, suggesting Marcus was lying to save himself, but the documented evidence supported every claim. Chloe's testimony was the most emotionally devastating. At 19 now, she spoke with hard-won wisdom about growing up with a serial killer, about documenting crimes while pretending normalcy, about choosing justice over blood. I loved my mother, Chloe said simply. Part of me still does. But she was planning to kill me. I found searches on her computer about inheritance law if I died before turning 21. She was researching boarding schools in Switzerland, but the bookmarks were about accidents that happened to American students abroad. She played recordings of Patricia discussing Chloe's problems with network members, debating whether she was salvageable as a future accomplice or too risky to keep alive. The casual discussion of murdering her own daughter chilled the courtroom. The defendant will refrain from outbursts, Judge Chen warned as Patricia whispered frantically to Stern. What made you start recording? Rodriguez asked gently. The night Dad died, Chloe replied. I heard Mom on the phone laughing. She said, the old fool finally stopped breathing. The project's complete. I knew then that nothing in our family was real except the danger. My own testimony came on day 6. I'd prepared extensively, but facing Patricia across the courtroom still felt surreal. The woman who'd pretended to mother me, who'd smiled at family dinners while planning my destruction, watched with calculating eyes as I swore to tell the truth. I walked the jury through 12 years of manipulation, the slow isolation from my father, the grief that made me vulnerable to her false comfort. Then the revelation at Mr. Lancaster's office, the unraveling of her plans, the evidence Eleanor had hidden for this moment. She told me ugly girls like me should be grateful for scraps. I testified, voice steady despite the humiliation of repeating those words. That pretty girls marry rich, but I was lucky they let me keep my pathetic job. She saw me as worthless, except as an obstacle to $8 million. How did those words make you feel? Rodriguez asked. Like I finally understood her, I replied. For 12 years, I'd tried to build a relationship to be the daughter she wanted. But I was never a person to her, just a problem to solve. The cruelty was honest. Everything else had been lies. I detailed the forged competencies documents the website Marcus created, the facility where inconvenient relatives vanished. The jury leaned forward as I described the race to stop her, the federal investigation and the network's exposure born from Eleanor's patient planning. Stern's cross-examination tried to paint me as bitter delusional, motivated by greed. But I had receipts for everything, documents, recordings, witness corroboration. Each attack only highlighted how thoroughly Patricia had tried to destroy me and how completely she'd failed. You hated Patricia from the beginning, Stern suggested. I wanted to love her, I corrected. She married my father when I was 15 and desperately missed my mother. I would have accepted any kindness from her. She gave me none, only manipulation disguised as concern. The defense's case relied on character witnesses and expert testimony challenging forensic evidence. The elderly men from Patricia's hospice volunteering testified about her compassion, unaware they'd been marked for death. A psychologist discussed false memory syndrome and family dynamics that could create conspiracy beliefs. But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. Agent Chen testified about the network structure showing Patricia wasn't a lone actor, but part of an organized crime syndicate. Financial forensics experts traced money flows, proving systematic theft. Other network members who'd flipped testified about Patricia's role and methods. Vera Kozlov appeared via video link from federal custody, finally extradited from Florida. Her testimony, given in exchange for avoiding death penalty charges, revealed the network's full scope. Patricia sat rigid as her mentor described training her, evaluating her performance, promoting her within the organization. Patricia Winters was one of my best students, Vera said with chilling pride. Efficient, careful, profitable. She understood that sentiment was weakness in our profession. Her only flaw was keeping that daughter around. I told her family was a liability. The closing arguments distilled 3 weeks of testimony into competing narratives. Rodriguez painted Patricia as a predator who'd turned murder into a business model, destroyed families for profit, and felt no remorse except for getting caught. She didn't just kill for money, Rodriguez concluded. She killed for sport rating victims like video game scores. She documented her crimes, trained her son in murder, planned to kill her daughter. This wasn't desperation or circumstance. This was evil wearing the mask of caregiving. Stern made one last attempt to humanize Patricia, to suggest reasonable doubt to blame the network while exonerating her. But his heart wasn't in it anymore. Too much evidence, too many witnesses, too clear a pattern of deliberate murder. Whatever you think of Patricia Winters, he concluded weakly, remember that proof beyond reasonable doubt is a high standard. If you have any doubt, you must acquit. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they filed back in, none would meet Patricia's eyes. The verdict came like hammer blows, guilty on all counts, murder in the first degree, wire fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. Count after count, guilty after guilty, 23 murders finally acknowledged and punished. Patricia remained stone-faced as the verdicts were read, but her hands trembled on the defense table. This woman who'd controlled everything, planned every move, manipulated every person, finally faced something she couldn't manage or escape justice. Judge Chen scheduled sentencing for the following month, but we all knew the outcome. Life without parole, the chance for freedom as dead as her victims. Patricia would die in prison hopefully after decades of contemplating her crimes. As court officers led Patricia away, she turned one last time. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and I saw something I'd never seen before: defeat. The predator was caged. The network shattered, the game finally over. Outside, the courthouse, families of victims gathered. We embraced, cried, shared the bittersweet victory of justice, delayed but delivered. The media clamored for statements, but we had only one message: our loved ones mattered. Their lives had value beyond bank accounts. Their deaths would not be forgotten or forgiven. Eleanor's plan had worked perfectly. She'd turned our family tragedy into the network's destruction, used Patricia's greed to expose an empire of death. From beyond the grave, she'd orchestrated justice for hundreds of victims across decades. The Winters' name would forever be linked to this case, but not as victims. We were the family that fought back, that refused to be silenced, that brought down serial killers hiding in plain sight. Patricia had tried to steal our legacy. Instead, she'd cemented it as one of courage, truth, and unrelenting pursuit of justice. As Chloe and I walked away from the courthouse, I thought about Patricia's final words at the house, that I'd become cold and calculating like Eleanor. But she was wrong. We weren't cold, we were strong. We weren't calculating, we were careful. And unlike Patricia, we used our strength to protect others, rather than prey on them. The trial was over, but the healing would take years. Still in that moment, standing in the afternoon sun with my chosen sister beside me, and justice finally served, I felt something I hadn't experienced since finding those pill bottles in my father's room: peace. Patricia had stolen so much from so many, but she couldn't steal our resilience, our truth, or our future. The harvest season was over. Now it was time to plant something better in the scorched earth she'd left behind. The courthouse corridor buzzed with nervous energy as we waited for the jury to return. 6 hours felt like 6 years, each minute stretching endlessly, while 12 strangers decided whether justice would finally be served. Families of Patricia's victims filled the hallway, some holding photographs of lost loved ones, others clutching hands in silent prayer. "They're coming back," Agent Chen announced, checking her phone. "Judge Chen is reconvening court." My heart hammered as we filed back into the courtroom. Patricia sat at the defense table, her carefully maintained facade showing cracks. Her gray roots had grown out further during the trial, and without her usual armor of expensive clothing and perfect makeup, she looked like what she was: an aging woman facing the consequences of a lifetime of evil. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Chen asked. The jury foreman, a middle-aged teacher who'd taken copious notes throughout the trial, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "The defendant will rise." Patricia stood slowly, stern, beside her. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. The control she'd wielded over everything and everyone had finally slipped away, leaving her exposed to the one force she couldn't manipulate: unanimous judgment of her peers. "On count 1, murder in the first degree and the death of Harold Morrison, how do you find guilty?" The word rang through the courtroom like a bell tolling. Patricia's shoulders tensed, but she remained standing. Behind me, Harold's daughter sobbed quietly, finally hearing the truth acknowledged after years of suspicion. "On count 2, murder in the first degree and the death of William Winters, how do you find guilty?" This one hit me physically, vindication and grief combining in a wave that made me grip Chloe's hand. My father's death was no longer a mystery or a tragic accident. It was murder acknowledged and punished by law. The litany continued through all 23 murder charges. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each verdict a small measure of justice for lives stolen, families destroyed, futures erased. The jury had seen through Patricia's masks to the predator beneath, had followed the trail of evidence Eleanor and others had so carefully laid. On count 24, attempted murder in the case of Robert Chen. How do you find guilty? Robert, sitting 2 rows behind me, exhaled sharply. His survival had been crucial to exposing Patricia, but hearing his suffering validated still mattered. Jeremy squeezed his father's shoulder as the verdicts continued. The fraud charges came next. Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, forgery. Each scheme Patricia had used to steal from her victims now returned as guilty verdicts. The conspiracy charges followed, acknowledging her role in the larger network that had turned murder into a business model. On count 47, conspiracy to commit murder for the purpose of financial gain. How do you find guilty? By the time the foreman finished, Patricia had been convicted on all 52 counts. The weight of it seemed to physically press down on her. The woman who'd walked so confidently through life, secure in her ability to manipulate any situation, finally faced complete defeat. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Judge Chen said, "The court thanks you for your service in this difficult case. You have performed your civic duty with diligence and wisdom. You are dismissed with the gratitude of this court." As the jurors filed out, several glanced at Patricia with expressions mixing disgust and pity. They'd spent 3 weeks seeing behind her grandmother's mask to the serial killer within. That image would likely haunt them as it haunted all of us who discovered the truth. "Your Honor," Stern said, his voice lacking its usual confidence, "the defense moves for a mistrial based on prejudicial media coverage and prosecutorial misconduct." Motion denied. Judge Chen ruled without hesitation. The defendant received a fair trial with vigorous defense representation. The verdict stands. Sentencing is scheduled for April 15th at 9 a.m. The defendant will remain in custody until that time. No. Patricia's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand. I saved those men from lingering deaths. I gave them comfort in their final days. This is persecution, not prosecution." Judge Chen's gavel silenced her. The defendant will maintain order or be removed from the courtroom. But Patricia was beyond control now. Years of carefully maintained facade crumbling in minutes. "Anne-Marie." She turned to me, eyes wild. "Tell them about your mother. Tell them what really happened. I know who killed her." The courtroom froze. Even Stern looked shocked by the outburst. Judge Chen called for order, but I was already standing, drawn by the desperate promise of answers I'd sought for decades. What about my mother?" I demanded. Vladimir knew her nurse. Patricia babbled, sensing she had my attention. "Not from the hospital, from before, from the network. She was supposed to recruit your mother, turn her into one of us. But your mother figured it out, threatened to expose everything. They had to silence her." "The defendant will remain silent," Judge Chen ordered, but Patricia kept talking over her. "Eleanor knew. She investigated for years, found connections. Why do you think she prepared so carefully? She knew the network killed your mother and would eventually come for the rest of you." Court officers moved to restrain her, but she writhed away, desperate to keep talking. "The nurse's name was Catherine Bell. She works at Presbyterian now. She's still active, still killing. I can give you names, locations, everything." "Remove the defendant," Judge Chen commanded. As officers dragged Patricia toward the holding cell door, she screamed one last revelation. "Your mother was pregnant when she died. They killed her because she was going to have another heir, another person standing between them and your family's money." The door slammed shut, cutting off her voice, but not the impact of her words. I stood frozen, processing the bomb she'd just detonated. My mother pregnant, murdered by the network before Patricia ever entered our lives. Everything I thought I knew shifted like tectonic plates. "Ms. Winters," Judge Chen said gently, "please sit down. Court is adjourned." But I couldn't move. Couldn't think beyond Patricia's desperate revelations. Chloe guided me to my seat as the courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, victims' families demanded answers, and federal agents huddled in urgent conference. She's lying, Mr. Lancaster said firmly, appearing at my side. Patricia would say anything to manipulate you, especially now. But what if she's not? I whispered. What if my mother was murdered and Eleanor knew? Agent Chen approached, her expression grim. We'll investigate every claim she made. If there's any truth to it, we'll find it. But remember, Patricia specializes in mixing truth with lies to cause maximum damage. This could be her final attempt to hurt you. The celebration I'd expected to feel at her conviction was replaced by churning uncertainty. Patricia had been found guilty, would spend her remaining years in prison, but she'd managed to poison even this moment of justice with doubt. Rodriguez joined our group, looking professionally satisfied despite the chaotic ending. 52 guilty verdicts. It's a complete victory regardless of her outbursts. She'll die in prison, Anne-Marie. She can't hurt anyone else. Can we verify what she said? I asked. About my mother, about this Catherine Bell. Already on it, Chen assured me. If this nurse exists and is part of the network, we'll find her. But don't let Patricia's manipulation rob you of this moment. Justice was served today. As we left the courthouse, media swarmed, but I couldn't focus on their questions. Patricia's words echoed in my mind. Pregnant, murdered, silenced. Had my mother died knowing she carried another child? Had Eleanor spent years investigating her daughter-in-law's murder while pretending to accept the accident story? Outside, victims' families gathered for an impromptu memorial. Photos of the dead were held high, their faces finally vindicated by guilty verdicts. Harold Morrison, Gregory Patterson, Michael Coleman, and my father, William Winters, among so many others. All Patricia's admitted victims, all finally acknowledged as murders rather than natural deaths. We did it, someone said, and others took up the chant. We did it. Justice, justice. I wanted to join their celebration, to feel their closure. Patricia would never kill again, never destroy another family, never steal another inheritance. The network she'd served was shattered, its members facing trials nationwide. We'd won by any measure. But victory felt hollow, with new questions haunting me. If Patricia told the truth, my mother's death was the network's first attempt on our family. They'd been circling us for over 20 years, patient predators waiting for opportunities. Eleanor had known and spent her final years building the trap that finally caught them. Don't let her win, Chloe said quietly beside me. Whatever the truth about your mother, Patricia told you to hurt, you not help you. She saw you getting justice and had to poison it. That's who she is. My sister was right. Patricia had lost everything, faced dying in prison, and used her last moments of freedom to inflict maximum damage. Whether truth or lie, the revelation was calculated to rob me of peace, to ensure her conviction brought pain rather than closure. We'll find the truth, I decided. If this Catherine Bell exists, if my mother was murdered, we'll prove it. But today, Patricia was convicted of killing 23 people. Today, justice won. The crowd began dispersing, families heading home with the bitter satisfaction of verdicts that couldn't resurrect the dead, but at least acknowledge their murders. Tomorrow would bring new investigations, more trials, the slow work of dismantling the network's remains. But today belonged to the victims. Their voices had finally been heard through testimony and evidence. Their deaths were no longer dismissed as natural or accidental, but recognized as the murders they'd always been. Patricia's reign of terror was over, her freedom forever forfeit to the justice system she'd evaded for so long. As we drove away from the courthouse, I thought about Eleanor's grand design. She'd known Patricia would eventually reveal whatever truth she held about my mother, would use it as a final weapon when cornered. But Eleanor had also known that truth, however painful, was better than ignorance. Patricia thought she'd won a final victory by destroying my peace. But she'd actually given me a gift, the possibility of answers about my mother's death, the chance to seek justice for the first crime against our family. The investigation would continue, the network would fall, and every secret would eventually surface. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Patricia Winter's serial killer and network assassin would die in prison. But the full truth about my family's tragedy was still emerging, and I wouldn't rest until every question was answered, every crime exposed, every victim vindicated. Justice had won today. Tomorrow we'd continue fighting for the complete truth Patricia had tried to bury with her victims. Eleanor's war wasn't over. It had just revealed another battlefield. 1 year later, I stood in my father's office now, mine watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and possibility. The mahogany desk, where he'd built his business empire, held new purpose, now covered with grant proposals and foundation documents rather than acquisition contracts. The Winters Family Foundation for Elder Protection had distributed $12 million in its first-year funding, everything from forensic accounting investigations to safe houses for vulnerable seniors. The Pennsylvania branch just sent their quarterly report. Chloe announced, entering with coffee and a thick folder. At 20, she was thriving in law school, channeling years of trauma into fierce advocacy for victims' rights. They've identified 3 suspicious deaths that match network patterns. Local authorities are opening investigations. I smiled at my sister, proud of the woman she'd become. The frightened teenager who'd secretly recorded her mother's crimes had transformed into a powerful voice for justice, her testimony inspiring other children of criminals to come forward and speak truth. Any word from the Memphis team? I asked, reviewing their financial statements. They prevented 2 marriages yesterday, Chloe reported with satisfaction. Lonely widowers being courted by women with suspicious backgrounds. Our screening protocols are working. The foundation had become more than either of us imagined. What started as a way to honor our father and grandmother had grown into a nationwide network of our own, but one dedicated to protection rather than predation. We funded private investigators, provided legal services, and most importantly, educated families about the warning signs of elder abuse. My phone buzzed with a video call from Robert Chen. He appeared on screen from his new office in Silicon Valley, where he'd returned to the tech world with a twist. His company Safeguard Seniors had developed monitoring software that detected unusual financial patterns and medication changes, alerting family members to potential exploitation. "Morning, Anne-Marie," he greeted warmly. "I wanted to share some news. We just got FDA approval for the medication interaction database. It'll flag dangerous combinations like the ones Patricia used, alert doctors and pharmacists automatically." "That's incredible, Robert. How many lives will that save?" "Thousands, we hope. Every pharmacy chain has already signed on. Patricia and her network thrived in information gaps. We're closing those gaps permanently." After we ended the call, I walked to the window wall where we'd installed a memorial. Photos of all confirmed network victims lined the glass, hundreds of faces representing lives cut short. My father smiled from among them, finally at peace. Below his photo hung a new addition, my mother, whose murder had been confirmed through Catherine Bell's confession 6 months ago. The investigation following Patricia's revelation had uncovered the network's earliest crimes. Catherine Bell, arrested within days of Patricia's verdict, had traded testimony for life instead of execution. She'd confirmed everything: my mother's discovery of their recruitment attempt, her threat to expose them, the staged car accident that silenced her. She'd even confirmed Patricia's final cruel revelation: my mother had been 3 months pregnant when she died. I touched her photo gently, this woman I barely remembered, but whose death had shaped everything that followed. She'd been the network's first failure in our family, the murder that made them cautious and patient with their next attempts. Her courage in threatening to expose them had probably saved other lives, even as it cost her own. "The roses are blooming beautifully," Mr. Lancaster announced, joining me at the window. Now in his 70s, he served as the Foundation's chief legal counsel, his decades of experience invaluable in navigating complex elder law. Eleanor would be pleased. Outside the garden we'd planted in Eleanor's memory flourished. Each rose variety represented a victim, their beauty rising from soil that had known too much darkness. Volunteers from families we'd helped tended them carefully, finding healing in nurturing life where death had once reigned. "Any updates on the trials?" I asked, though I knew he monitored them obsessively. "Vera Kozlov was sentenced yesterday," he reported with satisfaction. "Life without parole, served in solitary for her own protection. The other inmates don't take kindly to those who prey on the elderly." Marcus testified again, his cooperation continuing to exceed expectations. Marcus had surprised everyone by becoming one of the prosecution's most valuable assets. His 20-year sentence, reduced from life due to cooperation, was being served in minimum security, where he taught literacy classes and wrote detailed exposés of the network's operations. His letters to Chloe showed genuine remorse, though neither of us was ready for forgiveness. "And Patricia?" I asked, though I'd been avoiding news of her. "The dying," Lancaster said simply. "Pancreatic cancer diagnosed 2 months ago. The prison doctors give her 6 months at most. She's refused treatment, says she's ready for judgment." I felt nothing at the news. No satisfaction, no sympathy, just empty acknowledgement. Patricia had stolen so many years from so many people. That she would lose her own seemed like balance rather than revenge. "She's written you again?" Lancaster added, producing an envelope. "The prison forwarded it through my office. You don't have to read it." I took the letter, recognizing Patricia's handwriting even though it showed the shake of illness. These monthly letters had arrived like clockwork, each one unopened and filed away. But today, with sunlight streaming through the memorial window and life blooming in the garden below, I felt strong enough to face her words. The letter was shorter than expected, pain medication apparently affecting her usual verbosity. "Anne-Marie, the doctors say I'm dying. Strange how different it feels from this side, knowing death approaches naturally rather than by design. I won't ask for forgiveness. We both know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know something before I'm gone. Your grandmother was the only person who ever truly beat me. She saw through everything, planned for every contingency, turned my own greed into the weapon that destroyed me. I hated her for it, but I also respected her. In another life, we might have been allies rather than enemies. Take care of Chloe. She was the only good thing I ever created, and I nearly destroyed her too. The network is broken because of you, but others will rise. Evil doesn't die with individuals. Stay vigilant." "I dreamed of your mother last night. She was holding a baby, the one I helped ensure was never born. Hell is not fire and brimstone, Anne-Marie. It's seeing clearly all the lives you destroyed, all the futures you stole. I see them every night now." Patricia. I folded the letter carefully, adding it to the file with the others. No absolution, no forgiveness, just acknowledgement and warning. Even facing death, Patricia remained herself, clear-eyed about her evil, unrepentant but honest. The network's destruction hadn't reformed her, only revealed her. "The anniversary gala is next week," Chloe reminded me, pulling me back to the present. 300 confirmed guests, including the Attorney General. She wants to discuss making our screening protocols part of federal elder care regulations. Eleanor would have loved that, I smiled, her trap becoming law, protecting millions. We spent the afternoon in meetings, planning expansions and reviewing cases. The foundation had become our lives' work, transforming trauma into purpose. Every elder protected, every predator exposed, every family saved added meaning to our survival. As evening approached, I returned to the memorial window for our daily ritual. Chloe joined me along with staff members who'd lost family to the network. Together, we read names aloud, remembering lives stolen but not forgotten. Harold Morrison, William Winters, Eleanor Winters, Sarah Matthews, my mother's true name before marriage, and hundreds more. They mattered. We said in unison our daily affirmation. Their lives had value, their deaths have meaning. Their memory drives justice. Afterward, Chloe and I walked through Eleanor's rose garden discussing the foundation's future. She would take over operations when she graduated law school, bringing fresh perspective and energy. I would focus on expansion, creating international partnerships to combat elder abuse globally. "Do you think we'll ever be free of it?" Chloe asked suddenly. The shadow of what happened. I considered carefully. I think we transform it rather than escape it. Every life we save rewrites our story. Patricia tried to define us as victims. Instead, we became warriors. Grandmother's revenge, Chloe smiled. Not through violence, but through building something Patricia could never understand, a legacy of protection rather than predation. As darkness fell, the garden lights illuminated the roses, each bloom a defiant beauty in the night. Inside the house, Patricia had stalked through planning murder. We now planned salvation. The artifacts of death had become instruments of life. My phone chimed with an alert from our tip line. A concerned daughter in Idaho worried about her father's new girlfriend. The patterns were familiar. Recent widowhood, sudden romance, increasing isolation. Within minutes, I'd connected her with local resources and investigators. "Another one?" Chloe asked. "Maybe, but this time we're ready." That was Eleanor's greatest gift beyond the evidence and the trap and the justice. She'd taught us that evil thrives in isolation and ignorance, but withers under scrutiny and connection. The network had operated through separation, dividing families, and silencing concerns. We operated through unity, binding survivors and advocates into an unbreakable chain. Patricia would die soon in a prison hospital, her empire of death reduced to a cautionary tale. The network she'd served was scattered and broken, its members dead or imprisoned. But their victims lived on through the work we did, their stolen years transformed into saved lives. Standing in my father's office as the day ended, I opened the safe where I kept Eleanor's final journal. Her last entry, written days before her death, had become my mission statement. Evil is patient, but good must be more so. They will come for Anne-Marie, try to steal her future as they stole William's life. But they don't understand our true inheritance. It isn't money or property. It's the courage to face darkness and choose light to transform pain into purpose. The roses will bloom long after the predators are gone. Love transcends death. Justice transcends time. And my granddaughter will transcend them all. She was right. Patricia had tried to bury me, but I'd grown roots deep enough to crack her foundation. The network had tried to steal our legacy, but we'd transformed it into something they could never touch. Hope for others, facing the same darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new predators, new victims needing help. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of lives saved and justice served, I felt Eleanor's presence like a warm embrace. We'd won more than a legal victory. We'd proven that love and truth, patience and courage could defeat even the most calculated evil. The Winters Foundation would continue growing, spreading protection like Eleanor's roses, spreading beauty. Each saved life would be another flower in the garden of justice she'd planted with her sacrifice. Patricia and her network had thought they were harvesting deaths. Instead, they'd sown the seeds of their own destruction and the birth of something beautiful. In the end, that was the deepest justice, that from so much death had come enduring life, from so much darkness had come illuminating light. The predators were caged or gone, but the protectors remained vigilant and united. The story that began with my mother's murder and nearly ended with my own had transformed into something else entirely, a legacy of salvation that would outlive us all. Eleanor had played the longest game and won the greatest victory. Not just the destruction of evil, but the creation of lasting good. Thank you for following this journey of justice and survival. If you've experienced elder abuse or suspect someone you know is being exploited, please reach out for help. Organizations like the National Center on Elder Abuse, 1-855-500-3537, provide resources and support. Like Anne-Marie's story shows, speaking up can save lives. Please like, share, and subscribe to help spread awareness about elder abuse and the importance of protecting our vulnerable loved ones. Together, we can ensure that love triumphs over greed and justice prevails over predation. May you and your families find strength in truth and healing in justice.